Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've lived out here in northern British Columbia for 20 years now. It's just me, my cabin, and the woods. I built the place myself, log by log, back when I was a lot younger and had more energy. Over the years, I've gotten used to the solitude, the sounds of the forest, the way the light changes with the seasons. It's home. I know every inch of this property, every tree that leans a certain way, every animal trail. That's why what happened that one evening sticks with me so hard. It wasn't just strange. It was terrifying in a way that's hard to put into words, but I'll try. That day started like any other. I woke up early, made some coffee on the wood stove, and spent the morning checking my traps and doing some maintenance around the property. By afternoon, I knew I needed to chop more wood for the stove. Winter was coming, and I didn't want to be caught short. So I grabbed my axe and headed out to the pile near the edge of the clearing. The clearing is maybe 50 meters across, ringed by tall pines and spruce trees. Beyond that, it's just dense, untamed forest for miles. I've always liked the openness of it. Lets me see what's around, or so I thought. I spent a couple of hours chopping wood. It was hard work, but satisfying. The rhythm of the axe hitting the logs, the smell of fresh-cut pine, the way the chips flew, it kept my mind busy. The sun was starting to dip lower, casting long shadows across the ground. Dusk comes early this time of year, and the light turns this soft golden color that makes everything look peaceful. I was sweating, my arms aching, so I decided to call it a day. I stacked the last of the wood under the lean-to and wiped my face with my sleeve. The air was getting chilly, and I could feel the coolness seeping into my bones. I remember thinking about heading inside to warm up and maybe have some dinner. I was walking back toward the cabin, maybe 10 meters from the door, when I saw it. Movement, just at the edge of the clearing, where the trees start to thicken. At first, I thought it was a bear. We get black bears around here sometimes, and they're usually shy, but this was different. It was too tall, too upright. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart already starting to thump hard in my chest. Then I saw it clearly, a huge figure standing straight up just beyond the tree line. It was massive, way bigger than any man or bear I've ever seen. I'd guess it was 9 feet tall, maybe more. The fading light caught it just enough that I could see its shape, dark and hairy, but what really got me were its eyes. They were reflecting the light from my cabin windows, glowing this faint, eerie yellow, like 2 little points of fire in the shadows. I froze. My breath caught in my throat, and for a second I couldn't move at all. It was like my body just shut down. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This thing was real. And it was watching me. Not in a casual way like a deer or a squirrel, but with this intense, calculated awareness. It felt intelligent, like it knew exactly what I was and what I was doing. I've been around wildlife my whole life. Moose, wolves, even the occasional cougar, but nothing ever looked at me like that. It was unnerving in a deep, primal way. Then it moved. Not fast, but deliberate. It took a step forward, into the clearing, and crouched down slightly, like it was getting a better look or maybe readying itself. The distance closed to about 20 meters, and I could see it more clearly now. Its body was covered in dark, shaggy hair, but it moved smoothly, not clumsy like a bear. Its arms were long, hanging down almost to its knees, and its hands, I'll never forget its hands. They were huge, with thick fingers that looked like they could crush bone without effort. That's when the fear really hit me, a cold wave that washed over my whole body. My hands started shaking, and I could feel sweat breaking out on my forehead despite the chill. I knew I had to get inside. My cabin was right there, just a few steps away, but it felt like a mile. I started backing up slowly, not wanting to turn my back on it. Every muscle in my body was tense, ready to bolt, but I forced myself to move carefully. I didn't want to provoke it. My eyes were locked on it the whole time, and it just stayed there, crouched, watching me. Its eyes never left mine. That gaze was piercing, like it was seeing right through me. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, loud and fast, and my breathing was shallow, like I couldn't get enough air. Finally, I reached the door. My hand fumbled for the handle, and I pushed it open, stumbling inside. I slammed it shut and threw the bolt, my hands trembling so bad I could barely manage it. Leaning against the door, I tried to catch my breath, but the fear was still there, a tight knot in my stomach. I knew I needed my rifle. I keep it loaded in the corner by the wood stove just in case. I rushed over, my legs feeling weak, and grabbed it. The familiar weight of the gun in my hands was a small comfort, but not much. I've hunted my whole life, but this felt different. This wasn't about hunting, it was about survival. I went to the window, peering out through the glass. The creature was still there, standing now, not moving. It was just watching the cabin. The light from inside made its eyes glow even brighter, and I could see its massive frame silhouetted against the trees. It was so big, taller than the doorway, and its shoulders were broad, powerful. I kept thinking about its hands, how they looked like they could tear the cabin apart if it wanted to. That realization hit me hard. I've faced down bears before, and even they don't scare me as much as this did. Bears are animals. They act on instinct. This thing felt different, like it was thinking, planning. I stood there for what felt like forever, just watching it. My rifle was aimed, but I didn't have a clear shot, and part of me didn't want to shoot. What if I just made it angry? Minutes dragged by and it didn't move. The silence was deafening. Outside, the usual night sounds, the crickets, the wind in the trees, had gone quiet, like the forest was holding its breath. I could feel the cold seeping through the window pane, and my knuckles were white where I gripped the rifle. My mind was racing with questions. What was it? Why was it here? I've lived here 2 decades and never seen anything like it. Sure, I've heard stories from other folks in the area about big, hairy creatures in the woods, but I always brushed them off as tall tales. Now, I wasn't so sure. After what must have been 5 or 10 minutes, it finally moved. It turned its head slowly, like it was listening to something. Then it started walking away. Not running, just a steady, deliberate walk back into the trees. It disappeared into the darkness, and I stayed at the window, waiting, my heart still pounding. I didn't move for a long time, just stood there, staring out into the night, half expecting it to come back, but it didn't. The forest sounds slowly returned, but I couldn't relax. I spent the rest of the night sitting in a chair by the window, rifle across my lap, jumping at every little noise. I didn't sleep at all. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind made me tense up. My mind kept replaying those eyes, those hands, the way it moved. It was like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. When morning finally came, the sun rose slowly, casting a pale light over the clearing. I was exhausted, my body aching from tension, but I knew I had to go outside and see if there was any evidence. Part of me hoped it was all in my head, that I'd imagined it, but deep down, I knew I hadn't. I unlocked the door and stepped out, the cool morning air hitting my face. Everything looked normal, the woodpile, the trees, the sky, but I walked over to where I'd seen it standing, and that's when I saw them. Footprints. They were huge, way bigger than any bear tracks I've ever seen. I measured one with my hand, about 16 inches long and deep, like whatever made them was heavy. The prints led from the edge of the clearing right up to where it had been standing, then back into the forest. I followed them a short way, my heart in my throat, but I didn't go far. The trees were too thick, and I was too scared. Standing there, looking at those footprints, I felt a mix of curiosity and sheer dread. It was real. This thing had been here, right outside my home. I've thought about it a lot since then. Why did it come? Was it just passing through? Or was it curious about me? I'll probably never know. I've told a couple of close friends about it, but most people don't believe me, or they think I'm exaggerating. That's fine. I know what I saw. Life out here has gone back to normal for the most part, but I'm more cautious now. I keep my rifle closer, and I don't stay out after dusk if I can help it. Sometimes, when I'm chopping wood or just sitting on the porch, I'll catch myself scanning the tree line, half expecting to see those eyes again. It's left me with this unsettled feeling, like something changed that day, and I can't shake it. I'm still curious, still trying to make sense of it, but mostly I'm just unnerved. Whatever it was, it's out there, and I don't think I'll ever forget it. Story 2. It was the first week of January in the year 2000. I remember that specifically because we'd all talked about how weird it was to say it out loud. The whole Y2K thing had been a bust. Nothing happened, and we figured a camping trip was a good way to shake off the weirdness of a new millennium. We were on private land near Phelps Creek in Lee County, Alabama. A friend of a friend knew the owner, and we got permission. It was just a bunch of us, 4 guys, all in our early 20s, thinking we were tough and knew the woods. The land was mostly pine, but there were plenty of hardwoods too, all bare and skeletal because it was winter. The ground was a mess of wet leaves and mud from the rain that had just stopped. We got there in the late afternoon. The air was cold and damp, the kind that gets right into your bones. We set up camp in a small clearing not too far from the creek. You could hear the water, a constant low rush in the background. We got a fire going, started unpacking the coolers and gear, just normal stuff. The light was already starting to fade, that grey, washed-out winter light that makes everything look flat. That's when I first noticed the smell. It's hard to describe, but I'll never forget it. It wasn't just a dead animal smell, it was thicker. Rotten, but like old meat and something else, something foul and musky, like a wet dog that had been rolling in garbage. It came from down by the creek, carried on the breeze. I remember wrinkling my nose and saying something stupid like, "Whoa, something died." The other guys joked about it, one of them blaming another for his feet. We laughed it off, but the smell didn't go away. It just hung there, coming in waves. Then we heard the first sounds. They were faint at first, easy to miss over the crackle of the fire and our own noise. It was a low grunt, not a pig grunt, but deeper, guttural, like something clearing its throat from way down in its chest, and then a heavy crunch, a single footstep. It was so heavy, the sound of it carried through the ground more than the air. It felt solid. We all stopped talking at the same time and just looked at each other. "Deer?" one of my friends whispered. I just shook my head. No deer I'd ever heard made a sound like that, or smelled like that. The footsteps were slow, deliberate. Crunch, pause, crunch, moving along the creek bank, just out of sight in the trees. We were all staring into the woods now, but it was getting dark fast, and the trees just turned into a wall of blackness beyond the firelight. The grunt came again, a little closer this time. It was a hungry sound and curious sound. It made the hair on my arms stand up. Then we heard a splash from the creek, a big one, like a log had been thrown in. That's when 2 of our friends got back from gathering more firewood. They came crashing through the brush, laughing and talking, and just like that, the noises stopped. The smell even seemed to fade a little. We told them what we heard, but they just shrugged it off, said it was probably a bear or a big buck. We tried to believe them. We ate dinner, drank a few beers. The fire felt good. For a couple of hours, things felt almost normal again. We managed to push the unease to the back of our minds. But as it got fully dark, and the fire was the only source of light, the woods got quiet. Too quiet. No crickets, no owls, nothing. It was like everything living in that forest had decided to shut up and hide. That's when it started back up. The grunts came first, louder now, much louder. They weren't faint anymore. They were coming from maybe 50 yards away, down where the creek was. Deep, rumbling grunts that you could feel in your teeth, and the footsteps were back, but they were different. They weren't just heavy, they were fast. A series of quick, heavy thuds that shook the ground, followed by a big splash, then more thuds. It was moving. It was in the creek. We all stood up. Nobody said a word. We were frozen, just staring into the dark, listening to this thing moving around in the water. It sounded huge. Whatever it was splashing through the creek, not bothering to be quiet anymore. We could hear it sloshing through the water, moving back and forth. The smell came back with a vengeance, so strong it made my eyes water. That rotten, wet dog, decaying meat stench. It was unbearable. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I could feel the pulse in my neck. My hands were cold and sweaty at the same time. I remember thinking, this isn't an animal. This is something else. The firelight only reached maybe 20 feet out, and beyond that was just pitch black, but we could hear this thing perfectly. It was just on the other side of the light, moving in the water, grunting. I don't know what came over me. It was pure, stupid panic. I bent down, grabbed a good-sized rock from the edge of the fire pit. It was about the size of my fist, and I just hurled it as hard as I could toward the sound of the splashing. I didn't expect to hit anything. I just wanted to scare it, to make it go away. The rock flew into the darkness. There was a second of silence, and then a solid, wet thwack sound. I'd hit something solid. The splashing stopped. Everything stopped. For 1, 2, 3 heartbeats, there was nothing. Just the crackle of the fire and the sound of our own ragged breathing. Then it screamed. It wasn't a human scream. It wasn't an animal scream I'd ever heard. It was this piercing, high-pitched shriek that seemed to tear right through the air and echo off the trees. It was full of rage. It was a sound that said, "You hurt me." It was so loud and so sharp it felt like a physical blow. I swear the air got colder. All of us, we just froze. I mean, completely locked up. My muscles just seized. I couldn't have moved if I wanted to. The scream went on for what felt like a full minute, echoing through the hollow, and when it finally faded, my ears were ringing. The silence that followed was even worse. It was a heavy, waiting silence. Then we heard it leave the water. It wasn't a splash. It was a single, powerful surge, a sound of water being shoved aside with immense force, followed by a heavy, squelching thud on the bank. It had climbed out of the creek in one jump, and then it started moving again. Heavy, fast footsteps. Thump, 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 coming up the bank. It was coming towards us. We finally broke from our freeze. Someone yelled, "Get to the ATVs!" It was a scramble, a blind, panicked scramble. We were tripping over coolers, over each other. I remember the feeling of cold, wet leaves under my hands as I pushed myself up from a fall. The footsteps were getting closer, just outside the ring of firelight. We could hear its breathing now. A heavy, wet, guttural panting, like a huge dog that had been running, and low growls rumbled underneath the panting, a sound that vibrated deep in my chest. We were shouting, just nonsense, pure fear. Go, go, go. "What is that?" The thing answered us. Not with a growl, with another one of those screams, this one even louder, right from the edge of the darkness. It was so close. The smell was suffocating. We got to the ATVs, which were parked on a little trail at the edge of the clearing. I fumbled with the key, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get it in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I didn't even wait for the others. I just took off, headlight cutting a shaky path through the trees, bouncing over roots and ruts. I didn't look back. I could hear the other engines starting up behind me, and underneath that, I could still hear it. That heavy breathing, those fast footsteps moving through the woods parallel to us, keeping pace. I caught a glimpse of something dark and massive moving between the trees in my rearview mirror, but it was just a blur, a shadow. We rode for what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 minutes, until we hit a dirt road and then pavement. We didn't stop until we were back at the gas station where we'd met up earlier that day. We sat there on our machines, engines idling. just staring at each other. Nobody spoke. We were all pale, shaking. The fear was just dripping off of us, and this is the part that sounds crazy, and I still don't know why we did it. After we calmed down a little, after we talked in hushed, terrified voices about what the hell that was, we decided to go back. Our tents, our sleeping bags, all our gear was still there. And I think, on some level, we needed to prove to ourselves that we hadn't just lost our minds, that we hadn't just been scared by a bear. We went back slowly, all four of us on 2 ATVs, sticking together. The camp was exactly as we'd left it. The fire was still smoldering. Everything was quiet. The smell was gone. It felt normal, eerily normal. We were jumpy, scanning the trees with our flashlights, but we saw nothing, heard nothing. We decided we were too freaked out to pack up and leave in the dark, so we'd just sleep in the tents and get out at first light. It was a stupid decision, but exhaustion and a false sense of security had taken over. We zipped ourselves into our 2 tents. I was in one with one other guy. We didn't talk. We just lay there in our sleeping bags, listening. For a long time, there was nothing. Just the normal sounds of the woods, which had finally started up again. I remember looking at my watch. It was a little after 3 in the morning. I was just starting to drift off, my body exhausted from the adrenaline crash. That's when I heard the footsteps. They were right outside the tent. Not the heavy, running footsteps from before. These were slow, deliberate, crunch, pause, crunch. Walking a slow circle around our tent. Then I heard the grunt. It was so close, it was like it was right next to my head, just on the other side of the thin nylon wall. It was that same low, guttural sound, but softer now, a curious sound. I stopped breathing. I was lying on my side, facing the wall of the tent, and I could feel my friend next me go rigid. He was awake too. We didn't move. We didn't make a sound. I could feel the vibrations of its footsteps through the ground. I could hear its breathing again, that heavy, wet panting. It smelled. God, the smell came back, seeping through the fabric of the tent, that awful rotten musk. It was so strong I thought I was going to be sick. It stopped right by the front of the tent, where the zipper was. I could see its shadow against the orange fabric cast by the faint moonlight. It was huge. It blotted out the light. It was just standing there. I could hear it sniffing, a long, wet, snuffling sound right at the door. I squeezed my eyes shut. I prayed. I'm not even religious, but I prayed like I never had before. I thought, this is it. It's going to rip through the tent, and that's going to be the end. But it didn't. It just stood there, breathing, sniffing. Then it started pacing again. It circled our tent, then I heard it move over to the other tent, circle that one. It would stop, grunt, sniff the air, and then keep walking. This went on for 45 minutes. I know because I was staring at the glowing numbers on my watch the entire time, watching each minute tick by. It was the longest 45 minutes of my life. It was pure, unadulterated terror, the kind of fear that locks you in place, that turns your blood to ice. I was shivering, but not from the cold. Every muscle in my body was clenched so tight they ached. I was afraid to even swallow. And then, just as slowly as it started, the footsteps began to fade. The grunts got farther away. The smell gradually lessened. After a few minutes, it was gone. The woods were quiet again. We didn't sleep. We just lay there, waiting for the sun. The second the sky started to turn from black to gray, we unzipped the tent and got out. The camp was a wreck, not from us, but from it. All around our tents, in the soft, wet ground, were footprints. They were huge. I mean massive, longer and wider than my boot, and I wear a size 12. They were deep, like whatever made them was incredibly heavy. The toes were broad, and you could see the outline of a sort of flat foot, but the weirdest thing was the stride. The distance between the prints was huge. This thing had taken enormous steps. Then we looked up. Stuck in the branches of a pine tree, way higher than any of us could reach, maybe 12 feet off the ground, were tufts of coarse, dark brown hair. It was wrapped around the twigs, like something big and hairy had brushed right up against them. And behind my tent, in a little depression in the leaves, the grass was completely flattened. It was a perfect body-shaped impression, like something very large had been lying there, right next to us, watching us, listening to us breathe. We packed up our stuff in a frantic hurry and got the hell out of there. We didn't talk much on the way home, but that wasn't the end of it. A few weeks later, two of the guys who owned the land next to where we were camping went out to check on something. They heard the grunts again, the same ones we described, and they saw it. They saw a tall, dark brown figure standing upright, watching them from the tree line before it turned and melted back into the woods. Hearing that from them, from two grown men who don't scare easy, that confirmed everything. It made the whole thing real in a way that was even more terrifying. We weren't crazy. We hadn't imagined it. That scream, that smell, the sound of it breathing right outside the tent. I still hear it sometimes when it's quiet. I still smell it on damp, rotting leaves. I'll never ever go back into those woods. Whatever that thing was, it's still out there, and it knows we were there. Story 3. It happened this past autumn on a Tuesday. I'd been out of the service for about 2 years, and hiking was my therapy. Just me, my pack, and the trail. This particular trail was out west, in a dense national forest I won't name. It's a popular enough spot, but I'd gone off on a less maintained spur trail to get some real solitude. The air was cool and crisp, the kind that feels clean in your lungs. The sunlight came down through the tall pines in these thick, dusty beams. It was quiet, the kind of quiet you only get deep in the woods, just the sound of my boots crunching on the gravel and the occasional scolding from a squirrel. I'd been hiking for maybe 3 hours, just falling into that rhythm, my mind completely blank for the first time in weeks. The trail curved around a steep hillside, with a sharp drop-off to my left, down into a ravine choked with ferns and deadfall. Up ahead, maybe 150 yards, I saw 2 women. They were younger, probably in their 20s, dressed in bright-colored hiking clothes. They were laughing about something, the sound carrying clearly in the quiet. I remember feeling a little annoyed that my solitude was broken, but it was a fleeting thought. I just adjusted my pace to stay well behind them, giving them their space. That's when I saw the first movement. It wasn't on the trail, it was up, in the trees on the hillside to my right. The trees there were these massive, ancient-looking firs, with trunks so thick you couldn't wrap your arms around them. The branches were heavy and dark. At first, I thought it was a bear, a big one, maybe a grizzly. My heart did a little thump and my training kicked in. I froze, assessing, but it wasn't a bear. The shape was wrong. It was lankier. Then a second one moved, lower down in another tree, maybe 50 yards from the first and about level with the trail ahead, putting them both between me and the 2 women. They were ape-like. There's no other way to say it. They were huge, covered in shaggy, dark brown hair that was almost black in the shadows. Their arms were incredibly long and muscular, and they were using them to move through the trees with a silence that was just unnatural. They weren't clumsy or loud. They were fluid, like water flowing from branch to branch. Their legs seemed shorter in comparison, but powerful. I couldn't see their faces clearly from that distance, just dark patches under heavy brow ridges. But I could see what they were doing. They weren't just moving, they were tracking. Their heads were cocked. Their entire focus was locked on the 2 women ahead. They were stalking them. It was a coordinated, predatory movement. One would move a few branches, then stop, and the other would advance. They were closing the distance, using the cover of the dense canopy, and the women were completely oblivious, still chatting and laughing. My blood went cold. It wasn't just fear, it was this primal gut-level understanding of what I was seeing. This was a hunt. I'd seen that kind of focused intent before, in the eyes of other predators. This was the same, but magnified by 1,000, because I didn't know what these things were. I was unarmed. My knife was in my pack. All I had was a trekking pole, useless. My mind was racing, a frantic slideshow of options. Yell, it might spook them, or it might make them attack. Stay quiet and watch what happened next. I couldn't. I just couldn't. The creatures were getting closer to the trail, dropping lower in the trees. One of them was now maybe only 30 feet from the ground, its long fingers gripping a thick limb as it peered down. The women were about to pass directly underneath it. I didn't think. I just acted. I sucked in the biggest breath of my life, and I screamed. It wasn't a word, just a raw, loud yell that tore out of my throat. At the same time, I started waving my arms over my head like a madman, jumping up and down on the spot. I was making myself the biggest, loudest, most distracting target I could be. The effect was instantaneous and terrifying. Both creatures froze. Their heads, which had been pointed down the trail, snapped toward me in perfect unison. I still couldn't see their eyes, but I could feel their gaze. It was like a physical pressure. For a second, nothing moved. The forest went dead silent. Even the birds stopped chirping. Then the one closest to the trail let out a sound. It wasn't a roar. It was this low, guttural chuffing noise, like a pissed-off gorilla mixed with the sound of rocks grinding together. It vibrated in my chest. The other one echoed it, higher-pitched, almost a screech. They dropped. Not climbed, dropped. They just let go and fell the 20 or so feet to the forest floor, landing with these heavy, soft thuds that I felt through my boots. They didn't stumble. They landed in a crouch and then straightened up. They were even bigger on the ground. I'm 6'2", and they made me feel small. One of them, the bigger one, took a step toward me. It wasn't a bluff. Its shoulders were hunched, its head low. It was a threat display. My mind went blank with pure terror. This was it. I was dead. I was staring at two things that shouldn't exist, and they were about to tear me apart. But then the smaller one made a clicking sound with its tongue. The bigger one looked at it, then back at me. And then they turned and ran. They didn't run like a person or even like a bear. They ran with this loping, knuckle-walking gait. But they were unbelievably fast. They vanished into the thick undergrowth of the ravine in seconds, the foliage swallowing them without a sound. One moment they were there, a vision of pure nightmare. The next, the woods were just woods again. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely function. The whole encounter, from my scream to them disappearing, probably lasted less than 15 seconds. It felt like a lifetime. That's when I heard the women's voices, closer now. "Hey, are you okay? We heard a shout." They were jogging back toward me, their faces etched with concern. They thought I was the one in trouble. The irony was so thick I could taste it, metallic and sour in my mouth. I was still gasping for air, my heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted out. As they got closer, I fumbled for my phone. My hands were slick with sweat. I'd had the presence of mind in that split second when they first turned to look at me, to raise my phone and snap a picture. It was pure instinct, a desperate need for proof. "What's wrong? Did you fall?" one of them asked, her voice kind. I just shook my head, my throat too tight to speak. I finally got my phone unlocked and pulled up the photo gallery. My hand was trembling so much the image was blurry on the screen. I thrust it at them. The picture was crap. It was taken in a panic from too far away through branches, but it was there. You could see the two dark, hairy forms, one in the tree, one having just landed on the ground. They were blurred because they were moving, but the shapes were unmistakably not human, not bear, not anything normal. The woman who had spoken took the phone. Her expression shifted from concern to confusion. She squinted at the screen. What is that?" "I don't know," I managed to choke out. "They were in the trees. They were following you." The other woman leaned in to look. Her face went pale. "Oh my God. Is that a bear?" "It's not a bear," I said, my voice steadier now, firmer. Look at the proportions. The arms. They were stalking you, I yelled to scare them off. They both looked from the phone to my face, and I saw it click in their eyes. They saw the sheer, undiluted terror I was still radiating. They saw the photo, as bad as it was, and they got scared. But not of the creatures. They got scared of me. The one holding my phone handed it back like it was contaminated. Look, we should just go. We need to report this, I said, to the park rangers. Someone. Report what? The second woman said, her voice sharp with anxiety. A blurry picture? They'll think we're crazy. We're not reporting anything. They were real, I insisted, desperation creeping into my voice. You have to believe me. They were right there. We believe you saw something, the first woman said, but her tone was placating, the way you talk to a delusional person, but it was probably just bears. We're just going to head back to the car, okay? You should too. And before I could say another word, they turned around and started speed-walking back down the trail. Within moments, they were around the bend and gone. I was alone again. The silence rushed back in, but it wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy, oppressive. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made me jump. Were they still out there? Were they watching me now? I stood there for what felt like an hour, just scanning the trees, my ears straining for any sound that was out of place. My body was still buzzing with adrenaline, a sick, jittery feeling that made my teeth want to chatter. The relief that the women were safe was immense, a physical weight lifted off my shoulders, but it was immediately replaced by this deep, cold loneliness. I had seen something impossible, something that defied explanation, and the only other people who had even a glimpse of it had dismissed me. They'd looked at my fear and decided it was a problem with me, not with the world. I finally forced my legs to move. I didn't run. I walked as fast as I could without breaking into a sprint, my head on a swivel, my trekking pole gripped like a weapon. Every shadow looked like a hunched form. Every groaning tree limb sounded like a footstep. The hike back to the trailhead was the longest of my life. I didn't feel like a Marine. I felt like a prey animal. I got to my truck, fumbled the keys twice before I got the door open, and locked myself inside. I just sat there for a long time, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at the tree line. I kept expecting to see one of them step out of the woods and look at me with those dark, unknowable eyes. I still have the photo. It's still blurry, it's still crap. Nobody I've shown it to sees what I see. They see shadows, maybe a weirdly shaped log, a trick of the light. They don't see the predatory intent, the fluid, powerful movement, the sheer size of them. They don't feel the silence that fell over the forest when they appeared, or the way the air got cold. They don't hear that low, chuffing growl that seemed to come from the earth itself. I was relieved that day because I prevented an attack. I know I did, but I'm haunted. I'm haunted by the fact that things like that are out there, living in the shadows of places we think we know. I'm haunted by the women's disbelief, the way they looked at me like I was the threat. Mostly, I'm haunted by the memory of those two dark shapes moving through the trees with a purpose I understood all too well. The woods aren't just woods anymore. They're a place where the rules are different, and we're not always at the top of the food chain. And sometimes the things that live there come out to hunt. I saw it, I know what I saw, and I'll never be able to unsee it. Story 4. My name is Shannon. This happened 4 years after the first time, the first thing that happened to me, out in the woods near our homes. I never talked about that first time much, not even to my family. It was just too weird, too hard to explain without sounding like I'd lost my mind. But this second time, this one was different. It was louder, more aggressive, and I wasn't alone. It was a Saturday, late in the afternoon. The sun was starting to dip behind the trees, casting long, deep shadows across our backyards. I was at home, just messing around in the garage, when my neighbor from a few houses down came marching over. He looked pissed, really pissed. His face was red, and he was walking with this stiff, angry stride. He came right up to me and didn't even say hello, just launched into it. He accused me of being in the woods behind his property, shaking trees and making a racket. He said he'd heard all this thrashing and seen trees moving like someone was trying to tear them down. He was convinced it was me pulling some kind of stupid prank. I was completely thrown. I told him no, it wasn't me. I hadn't been back in those woods all day. I'd been right here, but he wasn't having it. He kept insisting, saying he knew it was me, that I was the only one who ever went back there. We went back and forth for a minute, him getting more frustrated, me getting more confused and a little defensive. Why would I lie about that? Finally, I just said, "Look, it wasn't me, but if you don't believe me, let's go look. Right now, we'll go see what it is." He agreed, but I could tell he thought he was going to prove me wrong, that we'd find some evidence of my mischief. So we started walking from my yard, cutting through a couple other properties to get to the strip of woods behind his place. The air was cool, that damp, earthy smell you get when the sun goes down. It was quiet, too quiet. Normally you'd hear birds, squirrels, something, but it was just still. We walked into the tree line, and the light changed instantly. It got dimmer, greener. The ground was soft under my boots, covered in a thick layer of old leaves and pine needles. My neighbor was walking a few steps ahead of me, still clearly annoyed, his eyes scanning the ground like he was looking for my footprints. We walked for maybe 5-10 minutes, heading towards this one particular spot he'd been talking about, a place where the land starts to rise up into a ridge. The trees were thicker there, lots of big oaks and pines growing close together. The air felt heavier too. I remember feeling a prickle on the back of my neck, that feeling you get when you know you're being watched. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just the tension between me and my neighbor making me jumpy. As we got closer to the base of the ridge, he pointed ahead. "Right there," he said, his voice lower now. "That's where I saw it." We both stopped walking. We were just standing there, looking at this area. Nothing seemed out of place. A few fallen branches, the same carpet of leaves. It was peaceful. I was about to turn to him and say, "See, nothing," when it happened. It didn't start quiet. There was no warning rustle, no subtle crack of a twig. It was just sound, a massive, explosive noise that came from right above us, from the top of the ridge. It wasn't just a growl, it wasn't just a howl, it was both at once, a deep guttural growl that ripped into a high, piercing howl that vibrated right through my chest. It was so loud, so close, it felt like it was inside my head. The sound was raw, full of this pure aggression. It wasn't a warning, it was a challenge, a scream of rage. I froze, my entire body locked up. My heart didn't just pound, it felt like it stopped completely for a second, then slammed back into rhythm so hard I thought my ribs would crack. The blood just drained from my face. I could feel it go cold. My neighbor was standing a few feet to my left. I looked at him. His eyes were wide, wider than I've ever seen a person's eyes. His mouth was hanging open. He was frozen solid too, just staring up at the ridge. All the anger was gone from his face, replaced by a pure, unthinking terror. Before either of us could even process the sound, the movement started. Two trees right next to each other at the top of the ridge just started shaking, violently. These weren't saplings, they were thick old trees, maybe as wide around as my thigh, and they weren't just swaying in the wind. There was no wind. They were being shaken hard from side to side, like a dog shaking a rag. The tops of the trees were whipping back and forth, and I could hear the wood groaning and creaking under the strain. Leaves and small branches were raining down on us, and underneath the sound of the trees, we could hear it. Deep, heavy grunts. Each grunt coincided with a shake of the trees. It was rhythmic, powerful. Whatever was doing it was immensely strong, and it was letting us know it was there. I couldn't see it. I was staring right at the spot, but the trees and the undergrowth were too thick. I just saw the trees thrashing and heard that horrible guttural vocalizing. That's the worst part, I think, not seeing it. My brain was screaming, trying to put a picture to the sound and the force, and it couldn't. It was just this invisible, massive, furious thing. The fear wasn't like being scared of the dark, or even like the sudden scare of a car accident. This was a primal, ancient fear. It was a deep, cold knowing in the very core of me that I was in the presence of something I was not supposed to see, something that could tear me apart without a second thought. My legs felt like water. My hands were trembling so bad I had to clench them into fists. The whole event, from the first roar to the trees shaking, probably only lasted 10 or 15 seconds, but it felt like an hour. It felt like time had stopped, and we were trapped in this bubble of pure terror. Then, my neighbor made a sound. It was a choked, gasping kind of sob that broke the spell. We didn't look at each other, we didn't say a word, we just turned and ran. I've never run like that in my life. It wasn't running, it was a blind, panicked flight. I crashed through bushes, slipped on leaves, didn't care about the branches whipping at my face and arms. I just pumped my legs, my lungs burning, my heart hammering against my throat. I could hear him right behind me, his footsteps pounding, his ragged breathing. We didn't stop, we didn't look back, and as soon as we started running, the activity stopped, just like that. The shaking of the trees ceased, the grunting stopped. The woods went dead silent again, as if a switch had been flipped. The silence was almost as terrifying as the noise had been. It felt like we were being watched as we fled. We burst out of the tree line into his backyard, both of us stumbling, gasping for air. We stood there for a minute, bent over, hands on our knees, trying to catch our breath. I looked over at him. He was pale, sweating, his eyes still wide with shock. He looked at me, and I saw the same understanding in his eyes that I felt. We had both heard it. We had both seen those trees. There was no denying it anymore. He just shook his head, a quick, sharp motion. Then he turned and walked straight into his house without another word. He didn't look back at me. He didn't look back at the woods. And he never, ever spoke of it again. Not once. I'd see him outside after that, and he'd give me a nod. But it was different. There was a distance there, and I noticed he never ever went into those woods again. He put up a taller fence, and that was that. A few days later, my dad was walking the property line for some reason, and he found a spot not too far from where we'd been. The ground was all torn up, like something big had been digging or just churning up the earth. He called me over to look at it. The soil was dark and wet, turned over in big clumps. It was a mess, but there were no tracks. No clear prints anyway. The ground was too churned and muddy to make out anything definite. My dad looked at it, shrugged and said, "Must have been a bear, a big one, tearing up a log for grubs or something." I didn't argue with him. What was I going to say? I just nodded and said, "Yeah, probably." But I knew. A bear doesn't sound like that. A bear doesn't shake two full-grown trees like they're twigs out of pure rage. A bear doesn't stop its racket the second you run, leaving an unnatural, waiting silence behind. That was years ago. My neighbor moved away a couple years back. I still live here. I still look out at those woods every single day. I never go back in there, not ever. Sometimes on a still night I'll stand at the edge of my yard and just listen. I never hear anything, but I always feel it, that cold spot in my gut, the memory of that sound, the feeling of being so small and so completely, utterly not alone in the dark. I don't know what it was. I don't have a name for it. I just know what I heard, what I felt, and what I saw those trees do. And I know that whatever it was, it knew we were there, and it wanted us to know it was there too. Meiju, Story 5. It was one of those perfect summer days in '96, the kind that makes you feel like you're exactly where you're supposed to be. The air was warm but not heavy, and the sky was that deep, clean blue you only seem to get in late July. My friend and I had decided to take our bikes out to Lampa Valley Road, just outside of Bannon. We weren't going anywhere in particular, just exploring. That was the whole point. We'd heard about these old logging roads that spiderwebbed through the pine forests back there, roads that weren't on any map, and we wanted to see where they went. I was on my old Honda, a bike that was more noise than power, but it was reliable. My friend was on a similar one, a Yamaha that backfired if you looked at it wrong. We'd been riding for a couple of hours, the smell of pine and hot engine oil filling our helmets. The roads were rough, just two dirt tracks with a line of grass growing between them, and the trees crowded in on both sides, their branches making a tunnel that the sun only broke through in little shifting patches. We came around a bend and saw a wider spot in the road, a place where it looked like trucks had turned around decades ago. To the right, the ground fell away into a steep valley. We killed the engines. The sudden silence was always a shock after the roar of the bikes, but this was different. This silence was total. I remember pulling my helmet off and just standing there listening, or trying to listen. There was nothing. No bird song, which was weird because the woods had been full of chatter just minutes before. No buzzing from flies or mosquitoes. The wind, which had been rustling the high branches, had just stopped. The only sound was the ticking of our engines as the metal cooled down. Tick, tick, tick. It sounded incredibly loud. I looked at my friend and he had this puzzled look on his face, like he was thinking the same thing. He didn't say anything, just shrugged and took a swig from his water bottle. We leaned the bikes on their kickstands and walked a few feet to the edge of the clearing to take a leak. That's when I first felt it, a kind of pressure in the air, like before a thunderstorm, but there wasn't a cloud in the sky. The hair on my arms stood up. I finished up and zipped my jeans, turning to look out across the valley. The other side was maybe 200 yards away, a steep slope covered in tall, dark pine trees, and that's when I saw the movement. It wasn't a flicker, it wasn't a deer moving through the underbrush. This was different. It was a big, dark shape shifting between the trees. I froze, my hand still on my zipper. "Hey," I said, my voice coming out as a croak. My friend turned to look. We both stood there, not moving, just staring. The shape moved again, and then it stepped out into a small, sunny patch on the opposite hillside. My brain just stopped. It couldn't process what I was seeing. It was standing upright on two legs. It was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing made me feel small. It had to be 6.5, maybe 7 feet tall. But it wasn't just tall. It was massive. Its shoulders were unbelievably wide, like a powerlifter's, but bigger. 3.5, maybe 4 feet across. It was covered head to toe in hair, dark brown, but where the sun hit it, it had this reddish, almost rusty tint to it. The hair wasn't long and shaggy like in some drawings. It was shorter, thick, like a bear's coat. It moved with this slow, powerful confidence. It didn't lurch or shamble. It took deliberate, heavy strides, its arms swinging naturally at its sides. It walked over to a fallen log, this big old pine that must have come down in a winter storm. It crouched down beside it, not like an animal, all hunched over. It crouched like a man would, one knee on the ground, the other bent, its long, powerful arms resting on its thigh. It stayed like that for a minute, just looking at the log. Then it stood up, turned, and sat down on a big tree stump right next to the log. It sat perfectly balanced, its posture relaxed, like a person would sit on a park bench. It just settled there, one of its hands, I guess you'd call it a hand, resting on its knee. It wasn't fidgeting, it wasn't looking around. It was just there, calm, completely at ease in its own skin. That's when the real terror hit me. It wasn't a sudden jump scare kind of fear. It was a cold, heavy dread that started in my gut and just spread through my whole body. We were completely exposed. We were standing in this open spot on the road with our bright-colored bikes right behind us. There was nowhere to hide. If it decided to come across that valley, it could be on us in less than a minute. There was no way we could outrun it. The bikes were our only chance. I looked at my friend. His face was white as a sheet. His eyes were wide, fixed on the thing across the valley. He slowly, very slowly, raised a trembling hand and pointed back towards the bikes. He didn't need to say anything. I nodded, my own head feeling like it was filled with cement. We started to back up, one slow, careful step at a time. We didn't turn our backs on it. Every muscle in my body was screaming at me to run, to just spin around and sprint. But some deeper instinct told me that would be the worst thing to do. We had to be quiet. We had to be slow. We made it back to the bikes. The feeling of the sun on my back felt like a target. I swung my leg over my Honda, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get the key into the ignition. My friend was doing the same, his movements clumsy and frantic. He kept glancing up, his eyes darting between me and the creature on the far hill. I took a deep breath, said a little prayer, and kicked the starter. The engine roared to life, a sound that was violently loud in the dead silence. The noise seemed to slap against the trees and echo across the valley. As soon as the sound hit, the creature moved. It turned its head, not its whole body, just its head. It turned slowly, deliberately towards the sound, towards us. I will never forget its face. It wasn't a monster's face. It wasn't snarling or roaring. It was just looking. It had a heavy brow ridge that shadowed its eyes, so I couldn't see them clearly, but I could feel its gaze. It was an intelligent look, a curious look. It didn't startle. It didn't show any fear. It didn't show any aggression either. It just observed us, this new noise in its quiet world. It was the calmness of it that was the most terrifying thing. We were making a huge racket, and it just turned and looked, like you'd look at a bird that had landed on your windowsill. My friend's bike coughed and then roared into life. That was all I needed. I didn't wait. I jammed the bike into gear, the transmission grinding painfully, and I twisted the throttle as hard as I could. The back tire spun, kicking up dirt and gravel, and the bike shot forward down the logging road. I didn't look back for the first few seconds. I was just focused on not crashing, on keeping the bike upright on the rough track. The trees were a green blur on either side. The wind whipped at my face, and I realized I'd forgotten to put my helmet on. It was still back there, hanging on my handlebars. After about 50 yards, I risked a glance over my shoulder. My friend was right behind me, his body low over the bike, his face a mask of pure panic. I looked past him, back towards the clearing we'd just fled. The stump was empty. The creature was gone. Just gone. There was no movement in the trees, no sign that it had ever been there at all. It had vanished in the handful of seconds it took for us to start the bikes and get moving, and that's when I heard it. As we sped away, putting distance between us and that place, the forest sounds came back. It happened all at once. A bird chirped, then another. The wind sighed through the pines. The buzz of an insect zipped past my ear. It was like a spell had been broken. The unnatural silence was gone, replaced by the normal busy sounds of a summer afternoon in the woods. But that just made it worse, in a way. It confirmed that what we had experienced wasn't normal, that the silence had been because of it, and the sounds returned because we were leaving it behind. We didn't stop until we hit the paved surface of Lampa Valley Road. We pulled over, both of us breathing like we'd just run a marathon. We looked at each other, and without a word, we both knew we weren't going to talk about it. Not then. Maybe not ever. What would we even say? We just sat there on our bikes, the engines rumbling, staring back at the dark line of the forest we'd just escaped from. I never went back down those logging roads. My friend sold his bike a month later. We hardly ever spoke after that. It was like that one afternoon had burned a hole in our friendship, and we couldn't look at each other without seeing the reflection of that thing in each other's eyes. I've turned it over in my head 1,000 times. A bear? No, bears don't walk like that. They don't sit on stumps with that kind of posture. They don't have those proportions. A man in a suit, out there, in the middle of nowhere? For what purpose? It makes no sense. It was just there. Huge, powerful, covered in hair, and utterly calm. It saw us, we saw it, and then it was gone. I don't know what it was. I only know what I saw with my own two eyes on a warm summer afternoon in '96, and that the memory of it, the feeling of being so completely and utterly exposed to something so far beyond my understanding, has never, ever left me. Story 6. The house was one of those older places tucked back off the main road, surrounded by a lot of trees. It felt cozy during the day, but at night it got real dark out there, with only a couple of streetlights barely cutting through the shadows. I remember it was a chilly evening, not freezing, but enough that you could see your breath if you stepped outside. Avery was already in his pajamas, playing with some Legos in his room upstairs, and Courtney and I were on the couch, talking about school and whatever else. I had this nagging feeling in my gut, though, like something was off, but I brushed it off as just being jumpy, because it was my first time babysitting for this family. Then, around 8 o'clock, I heard this noise from outside. At first I thought it was just the wind, or maybe a branch tapping against the house, but it wasn't that. It was this eerie knocking sound, like someone was hitting a piece of wood with a stick, but rhythmically, almost like a pattern. 3 knocks, then a pause, then 3 more. It sent a chill right through me. I paused the music and looked at Courtney, and she had this confused look on her face too. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. And she nodded, her eyes wide. My first thought was that Avery had wandered outside or something. I'd heard stories about kids getting curious and sneaking out, so I bolted upstairs to check on him. He was still in his room, sitting on the floor with his Legos, completely fine. I asked him if he'd heard anything, and he just shrugged and said, "It's just the monster." Like it was no big deal. That made my heart skip a beat. I tried to play it cool, told him it was probably just an animal, and went back downstairs, but the knocking didn't stop. If anything, it got louder, more insistent. Courtney and I went to the back door, which led out to this small patio and then the lawn. The backyard was pretty big, with a swing set and a bunch of trees lining the property. We stood there for a minute, listening, and I could feel the hair on my arms standing up. The sound was coming from the tree line, and it was so unnatural, not like any animal I'd ever heard. I cracked the door open and stepped onto the patio, the cold air hitting my face. That's when I saw it. Something moved across the lawn low to the ground, running on all fours. It was dark, so I couldn't make out details, but it looked like a person, except the way it moved was wrong. It was too fast, too fluid, almost like it was gliding. My breath caught in my throat and I froze, just staring. Courtney grabbed my arm and pulled me back inside, slamming the door shut. We both stood there, panting, and I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. "What was that?" she asked, her voice shaky. I didn't have an answer. We went back to the living room and I tried to calm down, but then Avery came downstairs. He looked scared, which he hadn't before. He said, "It's here again. The monster comes when Mum and Dad are gone." My stomach dropped. He told us that other babysitters had left because of it, but his parents always said it was just a bear or something. I felt this wave of dread wash over me, like if it was just a bear. Why were people so scared? Why did it keep happening? We decided to stay together in Avery's room because it felt safer being upstairs. His room had a big window that looked out over the backyard, and we closed the curtains, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. We sat on the floor with Avery, trying to distract him with stories. But the knocking started up again, this time closer, like right outside the window. I could feel the vibrations through the floor. Courtney and I exchanged looks, and I knew we were both thinking the same thing. We had to look. I crept over to the window and slowly pulled back the curtain just enough to peek out, and that's when I saw it. The face. Oh God, I'll never forget that face. It was pressed up against the glass, staring right at me. The skin was this pale grey color, like it was sick or something, and it had these severely chapped lips with deep cracks and lacerations, like it had been bleeding. The hair was patchy and balding in spots, and the eyes, they were intense, dark, and they felt like they were drilling into me. I couldn't move. It was like my body just shut down. I felt this cold sweat break out all over, and my legs went numb. I knew right then that this thing wasn't just some animal. It was intelligent, and it was plotting something evil. I could feel it in my bones. Courtney came up beside me and let out this gasp. She described it later as having an enormous head, way bigger than a human's, and those fingers, when it tapped on the glass, they were massive, like thick, gnarled branches. The tapping was soft but deliberate, and each tap sent a jolt through me. Avery started crying hysterically, clinging to my leg, and I had to force myself to snap out of it. We backed away from the window and called the police. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely dial the number. When the police showed up, maybe 20 minutes later, I was hoping they'd take us seriously, but they didn't. 2 officers came in, and one of them shone a flashlight in our faces, which made me squint and feel even more exposed. They asked if we'd been drinking or smoking, and I got so angry. I was 16, for God's sake, and I was terrified, not high. I tried to explain what we saw, but they kept interrupting, saying it was probably a bear or a prank. One of them went outside to look around, but he came back saying he didn't find anything. Meanwhile, the tapping had stopped, and everything was quiet, which almost made it worse because I knew it was still out there, waiting. After the police left, we were all on edge. We stayed in Avery's room with the lights on, not talking much, just listening. The silence was deafening. Then, around 11, we heard a noise from downstairs. A creak, like someone was walking around. My heart leaped into my throat. We didn't move, just held our breath, and then Avery's parents came home early. I've never been so relieved and scared at the same time. They found us huddled together, and when I tried to explain what happened, they got this look on their faces like I was making it up. They fired me on the spot, said I'd scared their son, and that was it. A few weeks later, I heard they moved away, and I never saw them again. To this day, I can't shake that image from my mind. I know what I saw, and it wasn't a bear. It was something else, something real and dangerous. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I still hear that knocking in my dreams, and I wake up sweating, convinced it's back. I don't have any answers, and I probably never will, but I had to get this out. Thanks for listening. Story 7. Okay, so I've never told this to anyone before, and honestly, I'm still not sure how to even put it into words. But here goes. I'm the one they call the Wild Man of Lissow, Wisconsin, back from around 1764. Yeah, I know how that sounds, like some old legend or something people made up to scare kids, but it's real. I'm real, and this one day, it's stuck with me ever since, like a cold spot in my chest that never warms up. I woke up that morning like any other, curled up in a thicket of pine needles and moss, the damp chill seeping into my bones. The woods were my home, had been for as long as I could remember. I don't know where I came from, just that I was left here as a kid, and the bears, they kind of took me in. Not like they talked or anything, but they didn't chase me off, and sometimes I'd find berries or scraps they'd left behind. Over the years I grew tall, really tall and strong, with hair covering me head to toe like a bear's coat. It kept me warm, but it also made me stand out. Not that I cared most days. I liked the solitude, the quiet of the forest, the way the light filtered through the trees in the early hours. But that day, something felt different. The air was heavy, like a storm was brewing, but the sky was clear. I could smell rain coming, though, that earthy scent that makes everything feel fresh. My stomach was rumbling. I hadn't eaten much the day before, just some roots and a few bugs I'd dug up. I decided to head toward the edge of the woods, where the shepherds grazed their sheep. I know it sounds mean, but I loved messing with them, not to hurt anyone or anything. I'm harmless, I swear. But the chaos, the confusion, it made me feel alive, like I was part of something, even if it was just scaring the daylights out of folks. I started moving through the trees, my feet sinking into the soft, wet ground. The underbrush crackled under my weight, but I've learned to move quietly over the years. It's all about placing your feet just right, avoiding dry twigs. My hair brushed against low-hanging branches, and I could feel the morning dew clinging to it, cold and sticky. The sun was just starting to rise, casting long shadows that made everything look twisted and strange. I could hear the distant bleating of sheep, a sound that always got my blood pumping. It was like a game to me. See how close I could get without being spotted, then burst out and watch them scatter. As I got nearer, I crouched behind a fallen log, peering through the ferns. The sheep were clustered together in a grassy clearing, munching on grass, their bells clinking softly. A couple of shepherds were sitting on a rock, talking in low voices. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but their tone was relaxed, like they didn't have a care in the world. That's when the idea hit me. Today, I'd make it bigger, louder. I'd let out one of my laughs, the kind that echoes through the hills and sends shivers down your spine. I took a deep breath, feeling the air fill my lungs. My heart was thumping hard against my ribs, not from fear, but excitement. This was my joy, my little rebellion against the loneliness. I waited until the shepherds were distracted, one of them pointing at something in the distance. Then I stood up slowly, my body uncoiling from the crouch. I'm tall, really tall, so when I rise it's like a tree springing up out of nowhere. The sheep noticed me first. Their heads shot up and they started bleating nervously, shifting on their feet. One of the shepherds turned and his eyes went wide. I saw the shock register on his face, the way his mouth dropped open. He nudged the other one and they both stared at me, frozen for a second. That's when I let out a laugh, a loud pealing sound that ripped through the quiet morning. It wasn't a mean laugh, it was just wild, uncontrolled, the kind of noise that doesn't sound human, and I guess it isn't, not really. It echoed off the hills, bouncing back at us, and the sheep went crazy. They bolted in every direction, their bells jangling wildly, their fluffy bodies scrambling over each other. The shepherds shouted, scrambling to their feet. I could see the fear in their eyes, that raw, gut-level terror that makes people's hands shake. One of them yelled something I couldn't understand, probably cursing me, and the other whistled for their dogs. Two big, shaggy dogs came bounding out of the brush, barking their heads off. I've seen those dogs before. They're fast, but I'm faster. I've spent my whole life running through these woods, dodging trees and leaping over streams. My legs are strong, built for this. I didn't wait for them to get closer. I turned and sprinted back into the trees, my laughter still ringing in the air. The dogs were hot on my heels, their barks sharp and angry. I could hear the shepherds shouting behind them, their voices fading as I pushed deeper into the forest. The ground was uneven, covered in roots and rocks, but I knew every inch of it. My feet pounded against the earth, each step sending vibrations up my legs. The cold air burned in my lungs, but it felt good, like I was flying. I ducked under a low branch, my hair catching on thorns, and I didn't even bother to untangle it. I just kept going, weaving through the trees. The dogs were gaining, though. I could hear their panting, the snap of their jaws as they tried to bite at my heels. One of them got close enough that I felt its hot breath on my calf. That sent a jolt of fear through me, not for myself, but for what might happen if they caught me. I've never hurt anyone, but I've seen how people react to things they don't understand. They'd probably try to lock me up, or worse. So I put on a burst of speed, my muscles straining. I leaped over a small creek, the water splashing up around my ankles. The dogs hesitated at the edge, barking furiously, but I didn't look back. I kept running, my heart hammering in my chest. The forest got thicker here, the trees crowding together, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out most of the light. It was darker, cooler, and the sounds of the chase started to fade. I slowed down a bit, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could still hear the dogs in the distance, but they were losing my trail. I found a spot behind a massive oak tree and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. My body was trembling, not from exhaustion, but from the adrenaline. I could feel the sweat cooling on my skin under all that hair, making me shiver. The woods were quiet again, except for the rustle of leaves and the occasional bird call. I closed my eyes for a moment, listening. That's when I heard it, a soft crunching sound, like someone stepping on dry leaves. My eyes snapped open. I peered around the tree, and there he was, one of the shepherds, standing about 20 feet away. He must have followed me, maybe split off from the dogs. He was holding a stick like a club, his knuckles white from gripping it so tight. His face was pale, and he was breathing hard, his eyes darting around like he was trying to spot me. I held still, not making a sound. I could smell his fear, that sour, sweaty scent that clings to people when they're scared out of their wits. He took a step forward, and I saw his hand shake. "Come out, you beast!" he shouted, his voice cracking. It was the first time I'd heard someone speak directly to me like that. Usually they just screamed or ran. Something about it made my stomach twist. I didn't want to scare him more, but I couldn't help it. The mischief was still bubbling inside me. So I let out a low chuckle, not as loud as before, but enough to let him know I was there. His head whipped toward the sound, and he stumbled back, almost tripping over a root. "What are you?" he whispered, and I could hear the confusion in his voice mixed with that fear. I didn't answer. I don't talk, never learned how. But I stepped out from behind the tree, just enough for him to see me fully. The sunlight caught my hair, making it glint like wet fur. I'm big, I know that, and in the dim light I must have looked like some kind of monster. He froze, his eyes locked on me. I could see the struggle in his face. Part of him wanted to run, but another part was curious, maybe even angry. He raised the stick, but his arm was trembling. "Stay back!" he yelled, but it came out weak like a plea. I didn't move, I just stood there watching him. For a second I thought about trying to communicate, to show him I wasn't a threat, but how? I'm just a wild thing, raised by bears and left to roam. So I did the only thing I could. I smiled, or at least I think it was a smile. My face isn't made for expressions like theirs, but I pulled my lips back, showing my teeth. It must have looked terrifying, because he let out a sharp gasp and dropped the stick. Then he turned and ran, crashing through the bushes like a startled deer. I listened to the sound of his footsteps fading, and a weird feeling settled over me. It wasn't joy anymore, it was emptiness. The fun had drained away, leaving me cold and alone again. I stood there for what felt like a long time, the forest slowly returning to its normal sounds. Birds started chirping, and a squirrel chattered overhead. I knew I should move, find a new spot to hide for the day, but I couldn't shake the image of that shepherd's face. The fear, the confusion, it was different this time. Usually I'd laugh it off and disappear, but today, it stuck with me. I started walking aimlessly, my feet carrying me deeper into the woods. The ground was soft here, covered in a carpet of pine needles, and the air smelled of damp earth and decay. I passed by a stream and stopped to drink, cupping my hands to scoop up the cold water. It tasted clean, familiar. As I drank, I thought about the girl they found years ago in these same woods. I never saw her, but I heard the stories, how she was wild like me, but they caught her, and she didn't last long in captivity. It made my skin crawl. That could be me. I've always managed to stay free, but what if one day I slip up? What if they bring more men, more dogs, and corner me? The thought sent a chill down my spine, and I rubbed my arms, trying to warm up. The sun was higher now, casting dappled light through the trees. I found a sunny patch and sat down, leaning against a tree trunk. The warmth felt good on my skin, seeping through the hair. I closed my eyes, listening to the woods. This is my home, but sometimes it feels like a prison. I can't go near people without causing panic, but I can't stay away forever either. The loneliness is a constant ache, like a hollow pit in my stomach. After a while, I got up and started moving again. I didn't have a destination, just wandering like always. I came across a berry bush and stopped to eat, the sweet juice staining my fingers. It was a small comfort, but it helped. As I ate, I heard voices in the distance, not shepherds this time, but deeper, more organized, men shouting orders, the sound of horses. My heart skipped a beat. Had they gathered a search party? I crouched low, peering through the bushes. I could see them, a group of men on horseback, armed with rifles and nets. They were spread out, methodically searching the area. One of them pointed in my direction, and I froze. They were too close. I had to move, and fast. I turned and ran, not caring about noise now. I just had to get away. My legs pumped hard, my breath coming in short gasps. I could hear the horses behind me, their hooves pounding the ground, and the men shouting, "There he is! Don't let him get away!" I veered off the path, plunging into a dense thicket of thorns. They scratched at my skin, pulling at my hair, but I didn't stop. I pushed through, the pain sharp and stinging. Behind me I heard the horses slow down. They couldn't follow through here. But the men were on foot now, their footsteps crashing through the undergrowth. I kept running, my lungs burning. I didn't know where I was going, just away. I burst out into a small clearing, and that's when I saw it. A steep ravine ahead with a river rushing at the bottom. I'd never been this way before. The men were closing in from behind, their voices getting louder. I had no choice. I took a running start and leaped, my body soaring through the air. For a moment, I was weightless, the wind whipping past me. Then I hit the other side, rolling on the soft earth. I scrambled to my feet and looked back. The men had stopped at the edge, shouting and pointing. One of them fired a shot into the air, the sound echoing like thunder. I didn't wait. I turned and disappeared into the trees on the other side, my body aching, my mind racing. I ran until I couldn't hear them anymore, until the only sound was my own breathing and the rustle of leaves. I found a hollow under a fallen tree and crawled inside, curling up into a ball. The darkness enveloped me, and I finally let myself shake, great heaving shudders that racked my whole body. I was safe for now, but the fear was still there, a cold knot in my gut. I stayed there for hours until the sun started to set and the woods grew dark. When I crawled out, everything was quiet. The men were gone, the chase over. But something had changed. That day I realized I'm not just a harmless trickster, I'm a thing to be hunted. And no matter how fast I run, how well I hide, they'll always be after me. I stood up, my joints stiff, and looked out at the forest. It's my home, but it's also my cage. And to this day, I still don't know why I'm here or what's going to happen next. I just keep moving, staying one step ahead, but the mystery of it all, it haunts me. Story 8. It was one of those perfect summer days in 2005, the kind you look back on and think, that's what a childhood memory should feel like. We were up near Seine, just a dot on the map in British Columbia, a place my family had been going to for years. The river trail was our spot. It wasn't some deep, dark forest path. It was open, with low brush and gravelly soil, the kind of place where you could see for a good distance. The river was wide and shallow there, chuckling over rocks, the sun flashing off it. It felt safe. It always felt safe. We'd been walking for maybe an hour, just me, my mom, my dad, and my older brother. We were heading back towards the truck, which was parked in a little pullout just off the main forestry road. I remember the feeling of the sun on my shoulders starting to cool as late afternoon set in. We were just chatting, not about anything important, just the dumb, easy stuff families talk about on a walk. I was lagging a bit behind, kicking at a pebble, when I happened to glance down towards the river. That's when I saw them. Down in the shallows, about 300 meters away, were 4 black shapes. My first thought was, oh, people fishing, but it was a weird spot for it, and there was something off about their posture. Then I thought, maybe bears. We get black bears around there, but these weren't moving like bears. They were standing upright. Hey, I said, not too loud, just enough to get my family's attention. Look down there. We all stopped. We just stood there on the trail, squinting. The sun was at our backs, so we had a clear view. There were 4 of them, pitch black. Not a shiny black, not a wet black, just a flat, matte, absorb all the light black. From top to bottom, no variation, no clothes, no features, just solid black silhouettes against the shimmer of the river and the green of the far bank. And they were huge. I mean, you see a person from that far away, you can gauge their size. These things were massive. They looked like walking telephone poles, just impossibly tall and thick. 2 of them were standing straight, and 2 were bent over at the waist, their upper bodies parallel to the water. They weren't crouching on their haunches like an animal would. They were bent over from the waist, like a person would bend down to drink from their hands. But they weren't drinking from their hands. Their heads were just dipped down towards the water. There was no scooping motion, no cupped hands. They were just drinking directly from the river. A weird silence fell over our family. The easy chatter just died. "What are they?" my brother asked, his voice hushed. "I don't know," my dad said, and I could hear the confusion in his voice, a kind of strained note I wasn't used to. "Maybe people in waders? Dark waders." But that didn't fit. Waders are bulky, but they have shape. You see legs, arms, a head. These things were just solid. There was no definition, no separation between limb and torso. It was like looking at 4 human-shaped voids, 4 cuts in the fabric of reality where something that was not us was standing, and they were so still. The 2 standing ones were perfectly motionless. The 2 bent over were frozen in that unnatural pose. There was no fidgeting, no shifting of weight, no communication between them that we could see. They were just there. The curiosity was overwhelming, a physical itch. We had to know, we had to get closer. "Let's go to the other side," my dad said suddenly, his decision breaking the spell. "We can drive around, get a view from the opposite bank. Maybe we can see what they are." It made sense. From where we were, the river was between us and them. If we could get to the other side, we'd be on the same bank, maybe get a better angle, see some detail, the distance, and the backlighting was hiding. We didn't run, but we walked fast, almost a power walk, back to the truck. No one spoke. The only sound was our feet crunching on the gravel and the quickened rhythm of my own breathing. I kept glancing back, making sure they were still there. They were. 4 black statues in the flowing water. We piled into the truck, my dad in the driver's seat, my mom in the passenger, me and my brother in the back. The engine roared to life, way louder than it should have in that quiet place. My dad threw it in gear and we sped off, kicking up a plume of dust from the gravel road. The plan was to cross the river at a bridge a few kilometers down the main road, then take a network of smaller side roads and logging tracks that we knew looped back towards the river on the other side. We'd fished over there before. We knew the area, or we thought we did. The excitement in the truck was a nervous, jangly thing. My brother was leaning forward, peering through the windshield. "They were huge, right? I'm not crazy?" "No, they were huge," my mom said, her voice tight. My dad was focused on the road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Probably just a trick of the light, people in black outfits. But he didn't sound like he believed it. None of us did. Trick of the light doesn't make something look that solid, that dense. We found the turnoff, a narrow track barely wider than the truck, hemmed in by alder trees that scraped against the sides. We bounced along, the suspension groaning. The atmosphere in the cab had changed. The initial curiosity was now laced with a low-grade dread. We were no longer just observers. We were actively pursuing something. We were seeking out the unknown. We drove for what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 or 15 minutes. Every time a break in the trees appeared, we'd all crane our necks, looking for a glimpse of the river, for those black shapes. But the brush was too thick. The side roads we remembered being clear were overgrown. We'd come to a pull-out, jump out, and try to bushwhack our way to the bank, only to be stopped by an impenetrable wall of devil's club and salmonberry bushes. Frustration was setting in. The initial drive, the sense of purpose was fading, replaced by a creeping anxiety. The sun was getting lower. The shadows under the trees were getting longer and deeper. "This is useless," my dad finally said, after we'd backed out of yet another dead-end track. "We're not going to get through. Let's just go back to the original spot. Maybe they're still there, and we can see them better from there now that the sun's shifted." It was a retreat. We all felt it. The mission had failed. The mood in the truck was deflated, heavy. The drive back to the main pullout was quiet. No one had anything to say. The what-ifs were starting to creep in. What if they weren't people? What if they were still there when we got back? What would we do? My heart was thumping hard against my ribs as my dad slowed the truck and pulled back into our original spot. The tires crunched on the gravel. We all got out, almost in unison, and walked quickly back to the edge of the trail, to the exact spot we'd been standing before. We looked down at the river. It was empty. The shallows where the 4 black figures had been were just water. Sunlight danced on the surface. The river flowed on, undisturbed. They were gone. Not a trace, no footprints on the gravel bar. And it was the kind of soft, wet gravel that would have held a print perfectly. No broken branches on the far bank, no movement in the trees, nothing. It was the suddenness of it that was so jarring. We'd only been gone 20, maybe 25 minutes total. In that short time, 4 massive pitch-black figures had just vanished into thin air. They couldn't have walked away up the bank without us seeing them from the road as we drove back. The bank was steep and open. They couldn't have just melted into the forest that quickly and silently. It was impossible. We stood there for a long time, just staring at the empty river. The silence was different now. It wasn't curious or confused. It was thick, suffocating. The air felt colder. The cheerful sound of the river now sounded like a mockery. That's when the real terror hit. It wasn't a jump scare kind of fear. It was a deep, cold, settling dread that started in my gut and seeped outwards, chilling my skin. My spine felt like a column of ice. The hairs on my arms and the back of my neck were standing up. We got back in the truck without a word. My dad started the engine, and we began the long drive home. For the first 10 minutes, nobody spoke. We were all just processing, trapped in our own heads, replaying what we'd seen. Then the theories started, shaky and unconvincing. Maybe they were just really tall people in black wetsuits, my mom offered, her voice thin. "People don't stand that still," my brother countered, "and they were bent over wrong. And the color, it was just black. No highlights, nothing." "Bears," I suggested, even though I knew it was wrong. "Bears don't stand on 2 legs for that long, and they don't bend at the waist to drink," my dad said quietly. He was staring straight ahead at the winding road. And they weren't shaped like bears. They were proportioned like people, but way, way bigger. That was the core of it. The proportions were humanoid, but the scale was all wrong. It was like seeing a person but magnified, made denser, and stripped of all identifying characteristics except for a shape that was almost, but not quite, familiar. The excitement we'd felt on the drive over was gone, completely replaced by a rattled, deep-seated unease. We were trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, and we all knew it. Nothing fit. Not people, not animals, nothing we knew of. The rest of the drive was a blur. We got home as the sun was setting. The familiar sight of our house, with its warm lights coming on, should have been a comfort, but it wasn't. It felt like we were bringing something back with us, a cold spot in the air, a shared secret that didn't make any sense. We talked about it for hours that night around the kitchen table, going over every detail, the absolute blackness, the sheer size, the unnatural way they were drinking, their complete and utter silence, their impossible disappearance. And that's the thing I keep coming back to, the thing that sends a fresh chill down my spine even now, years later. It wasn't what we saw that was the most terrifying part. It was the silence, the total, profound silence. 300 meters is not that far. On a quiet day by a river, you'd hear something, a splash, a grunt, a voice, the rustle of movement. There was nothing, just the sound of the river and our own breathing. They were just these silent, black, massive things standing in the water. And then they were gone, leaving us with nothing but a memory that doesn't fit into the world as we know it. We have no photos, no evidence, nothing to prove it. Just the four of us. And this story we still tell each other sometimes, our voices always dropping to a whisper, the same cold dread settling in the room every single time. I don't know what they were. I don't have a name for them. All I know is that we saw something that day, something that shouldn't exist, and the not knowing, the complete lack of an explanation, is a fear that has never really left me. It just sits there in the back of my mind, a quiet, dark shape in the shallows of my memory. Story 9. I'm Shannon Morgan. This happened a long time ago, back when I was 14, maybe 15 years old. We were living on that military base in North Carolina, and life was, well, it was complicated. My dad was career military, and we had a big family. A lot of mouths to feed, not always a lot of food to go around. That's kind of the starting point for all of this, I guess. It wasn't about adventure, it was about necessity. It was a fall day, I remember that clearly. The air was warm, but it had that crisp edge to it that tells you summer's really gone. The sun was out, but it was that weaker, golden kind of sun that doesn't really warm you up all the way. I'd skipped school that day. It wasn't a rebellious thing, not really. It was a practical thing. I had a plan. The base had these old, condemned farmsteads tucked away in forgotten corners, places that were scheduled for demolition or just left to rot. And sometimes, if you knew where to look, you could find discarded cases of MRES, meals ready to eat, sea rations, some people called them. For my family, that was like finding a treasure chest. A case could keep us going for a while. So I spent most of that day doing just that. I had a big, beat-up green duffel bag I'd swiped from my dad's old gear, and I was filling it with these brown, plastic-wrapped packages. I remember the specific weight of them, how the bag dug into my shoulder, the crinkling sound the plastic made every time I moved. I'd been at it for hours, my hands grimy, sweat making my t-shirt stick to my back even in the fall air. I'd hit a couple of good spots, and the bag was heavy, almost full. I was feeling pretty good, proud of myself, thinking about my mum's face when I brought it all home. That's when I made the decision that changed everything. The sun was starting to dip lower, painting the sky in oranges and purples. Dusk was coming on fast. I was on one side of a big, overgrown tract of land, and my house was on the other. The long way around was a good 45-minute walk on the roads. The shortcut was straight through this dense, swampy patch of woods that everyone usually avoided. It had a reputation, not an official. This place's haunted reputation, just a general feeling. The trees were too thick, the ground was always wet and sucking at your boots, and it was just quiet, eerie. I'd only ever been to the edge of it before, and that was enough. But my bag was heavy, I was tired, and I wanted to get home before my dad noticed I wasn't there and asked too many questions. I figured I could be brave for 20 minutes. I stepped off the worn path and into the tree line. The change was immediate. It was like stepping through a curtain. The light from the setting sun just vanished, choked out by a canopy of pine and thick, gnarly oaks draped in moss. The air got heavy and damp, and it smelled different. It wasn't just a forest smell of dirt and leaves. It was a thick, wet, rotting smell, like old vegetation and stagnant water. The temperature dropped a good 10 degrees. I remember pulling my thin jacket tighter around me, but it wasn't the cold that was getting to me. It was the silence. A minute before, out in the open, I could hear the distant hum of a generator, a far-off truck engine, birds chirping, normal bass sounds. In here, it all just stopped. It wasn't just quiet, It was a dead silence, a void. My own breathing sounded too loud. The rustle of my jacket was deafening. I stopped walking for a second, just listening. Nothing. No crickets, no birds, no rustle of squirrels in the leaves. It was wrong. Forests aren't silent, not even at dusk. Something had shut them up. That's when the feeling started. It's hard to describe, but I know anyone who's felt it will know exactly what I'm talking about. It was a physical sensation, a prickling on the back of my neck, a tightness between my shoulder blades, the absolute certain knowledge that I was not alone, that I was being watched. My eyes started scanning the shadows between the trees, my heart beginning to thump a little harder against my ribs. It was probably just a deer, I told myself, or a dog, maybe another kid messing around. But that feeling, it was too heavy, too focused. It felt intelligent. I kept walking, but slower now, my steps careful, trying to be as quiet as possible on the soggy ground. The duffel bag felt like it was filled with bricks, the strap cutting into my shoulder. I was maybe 100 yards in when I saw it. Up ahead, maybe 30 feet away, off to the right side of the vague trail I was following, there was a brown shape slumped against the base of a big pine tree. It was partially obscured by a thicket of brambles and ferns. My first thought, my logical, hopeful thought, was that it was an old marine field jacket, a camo jacket, discarded, maybe left by some soldier on a training exercise. It was that dull, earthy brown color. Maybe there was even more gear with it. My scavenger's mind kicked in, pushing the fear aside for a second. More stuff for the family. I adjusted the heavy bag on my shoulder and started moving towards it. My eyes fixed on that brown shape. I took maybe 5-6 steps closer. The light was bad, all deep shadows and murky green. The shape was big, bigger than a jacket should be. It was just a dark, hulking mass. And then, as I was squinting, trying to make it out, it moved. It didn't shift. It didn't stir. It rose. It uncoiled from the ground with a fluid, powerful motion that made my brain stutter. 1 second it was a mound on the forest floor. The next second it was towering, and I mean towering. It had to be 10 feet tall, maybe more. The brown wasn't a jacket. It was hair, long, matted, shaggy brown hair covering its entire body. It was just immense. The sheer bulk of it blocked out the trees behind it. I couldn't see any distinct features, no clear face, no eyes, just this overwhelming presence of mass and height and hair. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked up solid. My breath caught in my throat, a sharp, painful hitch. I couldn't have moved if I'd wanted to. It was like every survival instinct in my body short-circuited at once, leaving me as still as a statue. My brain was screaming a wordless, primal shriek of terror. This wasn't a bear. I'd seen bears. This was something else, something that wasn't supposed to be real. It turned its upper body, or at least I think it did. The movement was a blur. And then it took off. It didn't run away from me, not exactly. It moved laterally, parallel to me, crashing through the thicket. The sound was unbelievable. It wasn't the careful snapping of twigs a deer makes. This was a violent, explosive series of cracks and crashes. Branches as thick as my wrist were just snapping like dry kindling. The ground seemed to shake. It moved with a speed that was just impossible. For something that big, that heavy-looking, to move that fast through such dense undergrowth, it defied physics. It was a blur of brown power, a freight train plowing through the woods. The whole event, from the moment it rose to the moment it vanished into the deeper darkness, lasted maybe 3 seconds, maybe less. But those seconds stretched into an eternity of pure, undiluted fear. I felt a warmth spread down my leg and realized with a detached sort of horror that I had wet myself. The weight of the duffel bag was forgotten. The only thing that existed in the entire world was that thing, the sound of it, and the paralyzing terror it left in its wake. And then it was gone. The crashing sounds faded, replaced by that same heavy, dead silence. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place. It could have been 10 seconds, it could have been 2 minutes. My heart was hammering so hard I felt dizzy. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, feeling began to return to my limbs. It started with a tremor in my hands. Then my legs began to shake so badly I thought I'd collapse. And then a bird chirped. It was a single, tentative chirp from somewhere high up in the canopy. It was the most beautiful, most relieving sound I have ever heard in my life. It was like a spell breaking. A moment later, another bird answered it. The normal sounds of the forest, the ones that had been absent before, started to trickle back in. The buzz of an insect, the rustle of a leaf. It was as if the woods had been holding their breath, and now they could finally exhale. The spell was broken for me too. The trance of fear shattered, replaced by a single driving imperative. Get out, now. I turned around, my legs still wobbly, and I started to hurry. It wasn't a run at first. I was too uncoordinated, too scared I'd trip. It was a fast, stumbling walk, my head constantly swiveling, my ears straining for any sound that wasn't normal. Every shadow was a threat, every creak of a branch was that thing coming back for me. I clutched the strap of the duffel bag like a lifeline, its weight now a horrible burden, slowing me down. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I broke out of the tree line into the open air and the last of the twilight. I didn't stop. I ran the rest of the way home, my lungs burning. The image of that brown shape rising burned onto the back of my eyelids. I burst through the back door into the kitchen, my face probably white as a sheet, my pants damp. My mom was at the stove. She took one look at me and knew something was very wrong. I was crying, gasping for air. I dumped the whole story out in a frantic, jumbled mess. The woods, the silence, the thing, the size, the speed. I told her everything. She listened, her face getting graver and graver. When I finished, she didn't say anything for a long moment. She just looked at me, then walked over and locked the back door. She sat me down at the kitchen table. Her voice was low and very, very serious. She told me I was never, ever to go back into those woods, not for any reason. Then she said the words that have stuck with me ever since. She said, "Shannon, you never saw anything. Do you understand me? You tell this story to no one, not your friends, not your father, no one. We will never speak of this again." And we didn't. I never went back to that part of the base. I took the long way everywhere. For years I had nightmares about that brown shape rising out of the shadows. The feeling of being watched, that primal fear, it never really left me. It's been a lifetime, but sometimes, on a quiet fall evening when the light is just right, I'll catch a smell of wet decay or hear a branch snap in the distance. And for a split second, I'm 15 years old again, frozen in those woods, staring up at something that should not exist. I never found out what it was. I don't think I want to know. I just know what I saw. Story 10. Shadasi Chitu. It was still dark when we pulled off the road, the tires of my dad's old Chevy crunching on the frozen gravel of the pull-off. I remember the clock on the dash glowed a sickly green, 4:45 in the morning. I was 14 years old and my name is Shannon Morgan. My dad, he didn't say much. He never did on these mornings. It was a kind of quiet ritual, the clinking of his coffee thermos, the rustle of his heavy coat, the smell of cold air and old truck interior. He was taking me deer hunting, but I was too young for a license. My job was to be the pusher. I'd walk through a section of woods, hopefully rustle some deer, and push them in his direction where he'd be waiting, rifle ready, on a different stand. It made me feel important, like I was part of the hunt, even if I was just the noisy kid scaring the animals. That morning, he pointed a thick finger into the blackness beyond the truck's headlights. "See that logging trail? You follow that in for about a mile. There's a good ridge there. You just sit tight against that big fallen oak you'll see. Stay quiet for a bit. Then after an hour or so, you start walking slow, real slow, back towards the road. I'll be set up east of you. You push anything my way, you hear?" I nodded, my throat too tight with a mix of cold and nerves to speak. I pulled my own too thin jacket tighter around me and grabbed the backpack with a water bottle and a couple granola bars. He clapped me on the shoulder, a brief, hard gesture that was his version of affection. "Be careful, don't shoot yourself with that." He'd given me a single-shot .22 just for show, really, to make me feel like a hunter. I didn't even have any extra shells. Then he was gone, his own figure swallowed by the dark in the opposite direction. The truck door shut and the world went silent. I mean, a deep, heavy silence that pressed in on my ears. The headlights cut off, and for a second, I was blind. My heart was already thumping, just from being alone in the woods before daylight. It's a spooky feeling for anyone, but for a kid, it's downright terrifying. Every shadow is a monster, every rustle a predator. I started walking, my boots making too much noise on the frozen ground. The beam from my cheap flashlight bounced around, illuminating the skeletal trunks of trees, making long dancing shadows that seemed to reach for me. It felt like it took forever, but eventually, I found the ridge and the massive fallen oak he'd talked about. It was huge, the root ball taller than me, torn up from the ground and caked with frozen dirt. It created a natural backrest. I sat down with my back against the cold, rough bark, set the .22 across my lap, and switched off my flashlight. The darkness was absolute. I could hear my own breathing, see the little puffs of it in the air, lit by the faintest hint of pre-dawn grey starting to bleed into the sky. The cold seeped up through my jeans from the ground. I tried to be still, to be a good hunter, but my mind wandered. I thought about school, about a girl I liked, about anything but the fact that I was sitting alone in the middle of nowhere. The tiredness from getting up so early started to weigh on me. My eyes felt heavy. I told myself I'd just rest them for a minute. Just a minute. I must have dozed off, I don't know for how long. It wasn't a deep sleep, just a hazy drift, but the sound that woke me up was so sharp, so out of place, that it felt like a physical jolt. It was a branch snapping, not a little twig, but a thick, dry branch, the kind that makes a loud crack that echoes. My eyes flew open. My heart immediately started hammering against my ribs, a frantic, painful rhythm. I was frozen, not even breathing. I scanned the woods in front of me. The light had gotten a little better. It was that flat, grey time of morning where you can see shapes but no colour. The ridge I was on looked across a small, shallow gully to another ridge, maybe 30 feet away, and that's where I saw it. On the opposite ridge, standing between two trees, was a figure. It was tall, so damn tall, and it was just dark. A massive, upright shape covered in what looked like heavy, matted fur. It was just standing there, perfectly still, facing me. My brain, scrambling for an explanation, screamed, "Bear!" But it wasn't on all fours. It was standing on two legs, like a man. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees, and they were thick, powerful looking. I couldn't see a face. Where a face should have been, there was just shadow, a darker patch in the fur. But then I saw its breath. It was so cold that morning, your breath plumed out in a cloud, and I saw this cloud, this soft white puff, come from where its face was. That's what chilled me to the bone, more than the freezing air ever could. It was breathing, it was alive, and it was looking right at me. I could feel it. This wasn't some random animal glancing around, it was focused on me, my whole body locked up. I pressed myself back against the fallen tree, trying to make myself smaller, to disappear into the bark. I don't know how long I stayed like that. It could have been 10 seconds or 10 minutes. Time just stopped. All I could hear was the blood roaring in my ears and the frantic thudding of my own heart. I was terrified to blink, terrified that if I looked away for even a second it would be closer. My mind was a frantic, silent scream. What is that? What is that? It was too big for a man, too upright for a bear, The proportions were all wrong. The shoulders were huge, rounded, and the fur on them seemed a shade lighter than the rest of its body. A sort of dirty, dark brown, almost rusty. Same with its thighs. The rest of it was this deep, dark brown, almost black fur that looked shaggy and thick. It had to be 7 feet tall at least, maybe more. 9? It was hard to tell with the distance and the poor light, but it was massive. It had to weigh 500 pounds, easy. It was just this solid, hulking presence. We just stared at each other. It didn't make a sound. It didn't move. It just stood there, breathing those slow, steady plumes of white into the cold air, watching me. I was so scared I thought I was going to be sick. My hands were clenched so tight around the useless .22 that my knuckles ached, and then it moved. It wasn't a big movement. It didn't roar or charge. It just took a single, deliberate step, one step forward off the ridge and down into the gully that separated us. It was a slow, heavy step, like it was testing the ground. But that step was towards me. That one step broke the spell of frozen terror. Pure, unthinking panic took over. It was like a switch flipped in my head. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just moved. I leaped up from behind the log so fast I almost fell over. I didn't even look back. I just ran. I crashed through the woods, branches whipping at my face and tearing at my clothes. I didn't care. I didn't feel them. All I could feel was the burning in my lungs and the sheer, mindless need to get away. I wasn't running like a hunter or even like a person. I was running like a rabbit that knows a hawk is diving for it. I dropped the .22. I didn't even notice it was gone until later. My backpack bounced wildly on my shoulders. I was heading blindly in what I hoped was the direction of the road. I hit a barbed wire fence that I'd had to carefully climb over on the way in, struggling with it, trying not to snag my clothes. This time I didn't even slow down. I just tore through it. I heard the fabric of my jacket rip, felt a sharp sting on my arm as a barb dug in, but I ripped myself free and kept running. Nothing was going to stop me. I burst out of the tree line and onto the gravel road, my chest heaving, my legs like jelly. I could see the truck, a dark shape in the early morning gloom. I sprinted for it, my boots slipping on the loose stones. I grabbed the door handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. My dad had the keys. A sob ripped out of my throat. I was crying now, hot tears mixing with the cold on my face. I scrambled into the bed of the truck, pressing myself into the corner against the cab, pulling my knees up to my chest. I was shaking uncontrollably from the cold and from the fear. I kept my eyes glued to the tree line, expecting to see that dark, hulking shape emerge at any second, coming for me. It didn't. The woods were quiet again. Just the sound of the wind in the bare branches and my own ragged, hitched breathing. I sat there for what felt like an eternity. The sky slowly lightened from grey to a pale, weak blue. The sun came up, but it didn't bring any warmth. I just sat there, shivering, watching the woods, waiting for my dad. When I finally heard his footsteps on the gravel, it was the best sound I'd ever heard. I scrambled out of the truck bed and ran to him. He looked tired, a little annoyed. "Shannon, what are you doing out here? I've been waiting." "You were supposed to push towards me." The words tumbled out of me in a frantic, messy rush. I told him about the figure, the fur, the height, the breath, the way it stepped towards me. I was gesturing wildly, my voice cracking. I was sure he would see the pure terror on my face and understand. He didn't. He just sighed, a long, weary sound. He put a hand on my shoulder, not to comfort me, but to stop my frantic movements. "Shannon, stop it. You're shaking. You just saw a bear. A big old black bear standing up. It happens. You got spooked, that's all. You're letting your imagination run away with you." "It wasn't a bear, Dad," I pleaded, my voice desperate. "It was walking on 2 legs. It was tall. It had long arms. It was looking right at me." "Bears stand up," he said, his voice firm, final. He was already turning towards the truck, dismissing it. "They do it all the time to get a better look or smell. You were half asleep. It was dark. You got scared. It was a bear. Now get in the truck. You tore your good jacket. That was it. That was the end of the discussion. He didn't believe me. He thought I was a scared kid who'd lied to cover up the fact that I'd panicked and run from a common animal. The ride home was silent. He was disappointed. I was devastated and still deeply, deeply terrified. But I knew with every fiber of my being that it wasn't a bear. I've seen bears. I know what they look like. This thing, its proportions, the way it stood so perfectly upright and still, the sheer mass of it, the way it moved with that deliberate, heavy step, the way it felt like it was watching me, not just noticing me, the way its fur was lighter on the shoulders and thighs. You don't notice details like that on a bear you see for a few seconds in the panic of the moment. You notice them when you're frozen in place, staring at something for what feels like an eternity, memorizing every terrifying detail because your life might depend on it. I'm a lot older now, but I've never gone back into those woods. I don't even like camping. That feeling, that moment it took that one step towards me, it never really left. It's like it's burned into me. It was real. It was there. And sometimes late at night I'll wake up and for a split second I'm 14 years old again, sitting against a cold log, watching a dark shape breathe in the freezing air, and I feel that same icy fear grip my heart all over again. I never saw it again, but I know what I saw that morning and no one can ever tell me any different. Story 11. Look, I've never posted anything like this before. I don't even know why I'm typing this out now, years later. My hands are still a little shaky just thinking about it. I guess I just need to get it out there to see if anyone else has felt that specific kind of fear, the kind that doesn't just startle you, it changes something in you. It hollows you out and fills you with this cold, quiet dread that never really goes away. This was back when I was with my girlfriend. We were young, maybe in our early 20s, and we were spending a week up in northern Ontario. We'd rented this little cabin that was supposed to be secluded. And it was. It was way the hell out there, down a dirt road that seemed to go on forever, surrounded by nothing but pine trees and silence. It was a hot day in the middle of July, one of those humid, heavy days where the air feels like a warm blanket. We'd been cooped up in the cabin and we decided to go exploring. We'd heard from the guy who rented us the place that there was an old logging trail that led down to a secluded beach on one of the smaller lakes. He said it was beautiful and that we'd probably have the whole place to ourselves. He wasn't kidding. We packed a backpack with some water, a couple of beers and towels, and we started walking. The trail was overgrown, not used much at all. Branches kept scraping against our legs and the mosquitoes were a nightmare. It took us about 45 minutes of walking to finally hear the water. The trees suddenly opened up, and there it was. The beach it wasn't like a normal beach. It was a crescent of dark grey sand and smooth, flat stones that sloped gently into water so black it looked like ink. The lake was surrounded by a wall of dark green pine trees on all sides, so thick you couldn't see more than a few feet into them. The place was utterly silent, no birds, no wind rustling the leaves, nothing, just the faint lapping of water against the stones. It was beautiful in a stark, lonely kind of way, but the silence was the first thing that put me on edge. It felt wrong. We found a spot near the tree line, maybe 10 feet from where the forest began, and spread out our towels. For the first little while, it was fine. We swam in the cold, dark water, which was a relief from the heat. We drank a beer, just talking quietly. But that feeling of being watched, it started to creep in almost immediately. You know that feeling? Where the hairs on the back of your neck just sort of prickle. You tell yourself you're being stupid, that it's just because you're in a strange, quiet place. I kept looking over at the tree line. It was so dark in there, just a tangle of shadows and trunks. I remember trying to peer into it, but you couldn't see anything. It was like a solid wall of darkness. My girlfriend felt it too. I could tell. She was sitting close to me, and she wasn't really relaxing. She kept fidgeting, looking around, her eyes darting towards the woods every few seconds. "This place is kind of creepy," she said, her voice low. "It's just quiet," I said, trying to sound convincing. I didn't believe it either. We decided to just sit for a bit, dry off in the sun, and then head back. The plan was to maybe have lunch back at the cabin, but we just sat there, not talking much, both of us just listening. The silence was so heavy, it felt like a physical weight. I remember the sun was warm on my skin, but I felt cold inside. My stomach was tight. And then the birds stopped. I hadn't even realized there were any birds until the silence became absolute. One moment there was the faint, distant sound of something. Life. The next, it was just gone. It was like someone had thrown a soundproof blanket over the entire lake. The only noise was the water. My girlfriend grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. Her eyes were wide. She didn't have to say anything. We both felt it. Something was there. We both stared at the tree line right across from us. My heart was starting to thump hard in my chest, a dull, frantic rhythm. I was scanning the darkness, trying to see movement, a shape, anything. My eyes were playing tricks on me, making shadows look like they were moving. I was about to say we should just go, that this was stupid, when I saw it. It wasn't in the shadows. It was standing just inside the tree line, but not hidden. It was just there. It was tall. So goddamn tall. It had to be 8 feet, maybe more. It was standing upright on 2 legs, and it was just watching us. It was covered in shaggy, dark brown hair, almost black. It wasn't a bear. I've seen bears. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand like that. So still, so erect. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees. Its shoulders were massive, hunched and powerful, but it was the face, or the lack of one, that froze the blood in my veins. From that distance, maybe 100 feet away, I couldn't make out features. It was just a dark shape under a heavy brow, but I knew it was looking right at us. I could feel its gaze. It was a feeling of pure, undiluted attention. We were being studied. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't make a sound. I just pointed, my hand trembling. My girlfriend followed my gaze, and she let out this tiny, choked gasp. It was a sound of pure terror. She clutched my arm so hard it hurt. The creature didn't move. It just stood there, a monstrous silhouette against the dark green of the pines. It didn't make a sound. It didn't growl or roar. Its silence was more terrifying than any noise it could have made. It was the silence of a predator that doesn't need to announce itself. Then it took a step. It didn't rush. It wasn't aggressive. It just stepped out from the tree line onto the gray sand. Its feet were huge. I remember that clearly. They sunk into the sand, leaving deep, unmistakable impressions. It took one calm, deliberate step towards us. That was all it took. A bolt of pure animal fear shot through me. It was a chemical reaction, a primal signal that screamed, "Run!" I scrambled to my feet, yanking my girlfriend up with me. We didn't speak. There were no words. We just ran. We left everything, the backpack, the towels, the empty beer bottles. We just ran for the trailhead. The sand sucked at our feet, slowing us down, making every step feel like a nightmare. I kept expecting to hear heavy footsteps behind us, to feel a massive hand grab my shoulder. I was too terrified to look back. My girlfriend was sobbing, short, panicked breaths as she ran beside me. We hit the tree line and plunged into the dark of the trail. Branches whipped at our faces and arms, scratching us, but we didn't care. We just ran, stumbling over roots and rocks, driven by a blind, mindless panic. The only thing in my head was the image of that thing, its massive form, its silent, watching presence, the feeling of being prey. We didn't stop running until we burst out of the trail and saw our cabin. We fell against the door, fumbling with the lock, and practically fell inside. We slammed the door shut and locked it, then went around and locked all the windows, our hands shaking so badly we could barely turn the latches. We sat on the floor in the middle of the living room, back to back, just breathing, listening. The entire rest of the day, we didn't speak. We just sat there, jumping at every little sound from outside. That night, we didn't sleep. We sat up in bed with the lights on, staring at the dark windows. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of the trees outside made my heart leap into my throat. I kept seeing it in my mind, over and over, that step it took. That single calm step that felt like a promise. The next morning, in the harsh, clear light of day, things felt a little different. The terror had receded, replaced by a strange, nagging curiosity and a little bit of embarrassment. Had we overreacted? Had we just seen a large bear standing up on its hind legs? It happens. The silence, the feeling of being watched. Our minds could have manufactured all of that, right? We talked about it in hushed voices over coffee. We decided to go back, just to look, to prove to ourselves that it was nothing, to get our stuff back. The walk down the trail felt 10 times longer. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound was amplified. We held hands, our grips tight. When we broke through to the beach, the scene was exactly as we'd left it. Our towels were still there, crumpled on the sand. The backpack was where we'd dropped it. The first thing I did was look at the spot where it had been standing. The tree line was just a tree line now, just trees and shadows. There was no monstrous figure. I felt a wave of relief, mixed with a weird sense of disappointment. Maybe we had been stupid. Then my girlfriend said, "The tracks." I looked where she was pointing, the sand where the creature had stepped. We walked over slowly, cautiously. The beach was all soft, grey sand. It should have held a perfect impression of something that heavy. There was nothing. The sand was smooth, unblemished. There were our own footprints from when we'd arrived the day before, and the frantic, scrambled prints from when we'd run away. But where the creature had taken that one definitive step onto the beach, there was nothing. No depression, no outline, no sign that anything heavier than a squirrel had ever been there. We searched the whole area. We looked along the entire tree line. We found deer tracks, raccoon tracks, even what looked like a fox print. But there was no sign of the massive, deep tracks that thing should have left. It was impossible. I saw its foot sink into the sand. I saw it. We grabbed our things in a hurry and got out of there. We didn't speak on the walk back. We packed up our car and left the cabin a day early. We never talked about it much after that. What was there to say? But I've never forgotten that feeling. The oppressive silence, the way it just stood there watching, the sheer physical size of it, and the complete, illogical absence of any evidence the next day. It's the lack of tracks that haunts me the most. It makes the whole thing feel like a shared nightmare, but I know it wasn't. I know what I saw. We both did. And sometimes, on a quiet night, I can still feel that thing's attention on me, and I remember what it feels like to be nothing but prey. Story 12. It was a Tuesday evening, late in October, and the sun had already dipped below the trees, leaving that kind of greyish light where everything starts to look shadowy and weird. My son, he's 13, and we were driving back from his soccer practice over in Millersville. We take Old Carterville Road to get to Highway 61. It's a shortcut I've used for years, kind of a narrow, winding road that cuts through thick woods, with hardly any houses around. Most times it's peaceful, you know, just the hum of the car and the trees whipping by. That night, though, it felt different, like the air was heavier or something. I had the windows cracked open, and I could smell that damp, earthy scent from the woods, mixed with the cool breeze coming in. We were in my old pickup truck, a beat-up Ford that's seen better days, but it gets us where we need to go. My son was in the passenger seat, scrolling through his phone, not really paying attention to much else. I was driving, keeping my eyes on the road, because those curves can sneak up on you, especially when it's getting dark. The headlights were on, cutting through the gloom, and I remember thinking how the beams made the trees look like they were leaning in, like they were watching us. Sounds crazy, I know, but that's how it felt. We were about halfway to the highway, maybe a mile or so from the turnoff, when I saw something up ahead, near the edge of the road. At first I thought it was a bear. We get them around here sometimes, rooting through trash or crossing the road. It was hunched over, big and dark, and I slowed down a bit, not wanting to startle it or have it run out in front of us. My son looked up from his phone and said, "What's that, Dad?" His voice was calm, just curious. I told him it was probably a bear, and we should just give it space. But as we got closer, maybe 50 feet away, things started to not add up. The shape was wrong. It was too upright, even while it was crouched, and the fur looked off, coarser, like thick, matted black hair instead of the softer fur you see on bears around here. I eased off the gas, and the truck crept forward, the headlights washing over it. Then it stood up. I swear my heart just dropped into my stomach. 1 second it was low to the ground, and the next it straightened up, and it was huge. I mean, over 8 feet tall, easily. I'm 6 feet even, and this thing towered over what I could compare it to. It wasn't a bear, no way. Its body was massive, covered in that coarse black hair from head to toe, and it had this pointed head, almost like a cone shape, but not sharp, just unnatural. And its hands, they were human-like with long fingers, and it was holding something white in one of them. A white object, maybe the size of a small box or something, but it was swinging lightly like it was alive. The headlights hit it full on, and it flinched like the light bothered it. It turned its head away from us, and I could see the muscles in its shoulders and back flexing under the hair. It was built like an athlete, but on a scale I've never seen. Thick, powerful legs, arms that looked like they could rip a tree out of the ground. I'd guess it weighed over 600 pounds, but it moved with this balanced, upright stride that was smooth, not clumsy like a bear. It didn't lumber. It strode like a person, but faster, way faster. My son gasped, and I heard his phone clatter to the floor. "Dad, what is that?" he whispered, his voice shaking. I couldn't answer. I was frozen, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The creature took a step toward the woods, then another, and then it broke into a run. And God, the speed, it was incredible. It didn't just run, it bolted like a sprinter, but with this raw power that made the ground seem to shake. I saw its muscles bunching and releasing under the hair, and the white object in its hand swung back and forth as it moved. It vanished into the trees in seconds, just swallowed up by the darkness, but the image of it running, that athletic, almost graceful motion, is burned into my brain. For a second we just sat there, stunned. The truck was still idling, and the headlights were pointed at the spot where it disappeared. The woods were silent, like everything had stopped to watch. Then my son started crying, quiet sobs that made my chest ache. I reached over and put a hand on his shoulder, and I could feel him trembling. "It's okay," I said, but my voice was shaky too. "It's gone." But was it? I kept staring into the trees, half expecting it to come back out. I put the truck in park and just sat there for what felt like forever, but it was probably only a minute or two. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and my palms were sweaty on the wheel. I rolled up the windows, the sound of the crank too loud in the silence. The air in the cab felt thick, heavy with fear. I kept replaying it in my head, the way it rose up, the way it moved. It wasn't like any animal I've ever seen, and I've spent my whole life in these parts, hunting and fishing. Bears don't stand that tall or run like that. Deer don't have hands or hold things. My son wiped his eyes and asked, was it a person? But I knew it wasn't. People don't get that big or move that fast. And the hands, they were human-like, but bigger, rougher, with nails that looked thick and dark, and that white object. Later I thought about the chicken coops some folks have out here, and it hit me. It might have been a chicken. White feathers, maybe. The thought made me sick, because if it was, that thing was strong enough to snatch one without a sound. I finally got the truck moving again, but I drove slow, my eyes darting to the woods on either side. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of leaves made me jump. My son huddled against the door, not saying much, just staring out the window like he was afraid something would pop out. The rest of the drive to Highway 61 felt like it took hours, but it was only a few minutes. When we hit the highway, the lights and other cars should have felt comforting, but they didn't. I felt exposed, like we'd brought some of that darkness with us. We didn't talk much on the way home. What was there to say? "Hey, son, we just saw a monster." It sounds ridiculous even now. When we got back to the house, I parked in the driveway and just sat there for a bit, the engine ticking as it cooled. My wife came out, asking why we were late, and I couldn't tell her. Not right then. I just said we saw something weird on the road and left it at that. My son went straight to his room, and I heard him lock the door. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. The way it stood up, the way it ran. The details kept coming back. The coarse hair that looked almost wet in the headlights. The pointed head that didn't seem to have much of a neck, just blended into the shoulders. And the hands, I can't get over the hands. They were so human but wrong, like something out of a nightmare. I kept thinking about the white object swinging, and I wondered if it was from one of the farms nearby. Old Man Henderson has chickens a couple miles down, and sometimes they get out. But nothing like this. The next day I thought about going back to look for tracks or something, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. What if it was still there? What if it wasn't alone? My son didn't want to talk about it, and I didn't push him. But a few days later, he asked me if I believed in Bigfoot now. I didn't know what to say. I've always been a skeptic, you know, thought those stories were just campfire tales. But after that, I'm not so sure. The thing is, it wasn't just big and hairy. It moved with a purpose, like it knew what it was doing. It wasn't some mindless beast. It was aware, intelligent even. I've driven down Old Carterville Road a few times since then, always during the day, and I've never seen anything out of the ordinary. But every time I get that same chill, like I'm being watched. The woods seem darker, thicker, like they're hiding something. My son won't go with me anymore. He asks to take the long way around, and I don't blame him. I still don't have any answers. Was it Bigfoot? Some kind of unknown animal? I don't know. All I know is what I saw that evening, and it stuck with me. The image of that creature, rising up and running into the trees, is something I'll never forget. And that white object swinging in its hand, it's like a ghost in my mind, reminding me that there are things out there we can't explain. Maybe it's better that way, but the fear is real and it's not going away, so that's it. That's what happened. I've told a couple of friends, and they just laugh it off or say I was tired, but I wasn't. My son saw it too, and he's not the same. He jumps at noises now, and he keeps his bedroom window locked tight. I guess I'm sharing this because I need to know if anyone else has seen something like that around here, or if I'm just going crazy. But deep down, I know what I saw, and it was real, and that's the scariest part. Story 13. It was the third day of our elk hunting trip. My dad and I were way out there, a solid 10 miles from the nearest other camp, deep in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest near Strawberry Lake in Washington. You know the kind of place. So quiet you can hear your own heartbeat. The air smells like wet earth and pine, and the only company you usually have are the squirrels and the occasional jay. We'd set up camp in a small clearing, just big enough for our two-man tent and a fire pit we'd ringed with stones. That afternoon, we were getting camp squared away for the evening. We'd spent a good part of the day hiking and glassing the ridges, but hadn't seen much. The light was starting to go, that long golden kind of light that makes everything look peaceful. We were splitting firewood for the night. I was doing the splitting, my dad was stacking. The rhythm of it was almost meditative. Lift the maul, bring it down, a solid thwack, the dry wood giving way with a clean crack. The sound echoed a little in the trees, but it was just us, the forest, and that repetitive noise. And then it stopped being just us. I'd just split a good-sized chunk of fir, and the sound was still hanging in the air when we heard it. 2 loud knocks. Not like a woodpecker. This was different, deeper, heavier. It sounded like someone had taken a giant sledgehammer and hit a massive solid tree trunk twice. Boom, boom. The sound came from the timberline, maybe 100 yards away, deep in the shadows where the light didn't really reach. We both froze. My dad looked at me, and I looked at him. His face had gone blank, the way it does when he's processing something he doesn't understand. The silence that followed was thicker than before, heavy. It was the kind of quiet that feels like it's pressing in on your ears. My first thought was another hunter, but that was stupid. We were 10 miles in. Nobody else was out here, and it didn't sound like a gunshot or a hatchet. It was a hollow, percussive thump that seemed to come from high up, like whatever made it was tall. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was just a reflex, a stupid human thing to try and communicate. I picked up the maul, walked over to a big cedar near our camp, and swung it hard against the trunk. It made a dull, unsatisfying thud. It was a pathetic sound compared to what we'd just heard. I remember the vibration stinging my hands and feeling instantly foolish. We stood there, not saying a word, just listening. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no squirrels chattering, nothing. It was like everything was holding its breath. A minute passed. It felt like an hour. My heart was thumping in my chest, a nervous, fluttery beat. Then it came. One single knock. Boom. It was so loud it felt like a physical blow. It wasn't just a sound you heard, you felt it in your bones, in the pit of your stomach. It was easily 3 times as loud as the first 2, and it echoed through the valley, rolling back at us from the hills. A cold chill, the kind that has nothing to do with the temperature, shot straight down my spine. It was an answer, a clear, unmistakable answer. And it was closer, a lot closer. My dad finally spoke, his voice low and tight. "Let's get the fire going." We didn't talk about it. We just worked, piling on wood until we had a blaze that was probably bigger than we needed, the flames licking high into the twilight. We cooked dinner, ate in near silence, and the whole time, the back of my neck was prickling. I kept looking over my shoulder, into the dark beyond the firelight. It felt like we were being watched, not in a casual way, but studied. The normal night sounds eventually came back, the crickets, the distant hoot of an owl. But it didn't feel normal anymore. It felt like a cover. We turned in early. The tent felt flimsy, just a thin layer of nylon between us and whatever was out there. I remember lying in my sleeping bag, listening. Every little crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves, made my whole body tense up. I could hear my dad breathing, and I knew he wasn't asleep either. I must have drifted off eventually, because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake. It wasn't a sound that woke me. It was an impact. A sharp, hard slap against the side of the tent right by my head. The whole tent wall bowed inwards and the poles shuddered. It was the sound you'd make if you smacked a taut bedsheet with a broom handle. A short, violent whoop. I froze solid. My heart was suddenly hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would burst. I held my breath, listening. My dad was awake too. I could hear his sharp intake of breath next to me. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. His voice was shaky. "Yeah," I managed to choke out. We lay there for what felt like forever, just waiting. Nothing. No footsteps, no breathing, no more slaps, just the deafening silence and the pounding in my ears. After a few minutes, a crazy kind of courage, or maybe just pure fear-driven adrenaline, took over. I had to see. I had to know. I unzipped my sleeping bag as quietly as I could, the sound of the zipper impossibly loud. I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight and my hunting knife. My hands were trembling. "I'm going to look," I whispered to my dad. "Be careful," he said, and I could hear the real fear in his voice. That scared me more than anything. My dad doesn't scare easy. I unzipped the tent flap slowly, wincing at every tiny sound. The cold night air hit my face. I clicked on the flashlight, its beam cutting a shaky path through the dark. I swept it around the campsite. Nothing. The fire was just embers, casting a faint orange glow. I stood up, my legs feeling like jelly, and walked over to the side of the tent where the slap had happened. I examined the ground. The pine needles were undisturbed, no footprints. I looked at the tent fabric itself. No marks, no tears. I shone the light up into the trees, thinking maybe a branch had fallen. But there were no broken branches above us, nothing hanging down. It was just our tent, sitting there in the clearing. The slap had been hard enough to vibrate the whole structure, but there was no evidence, nothing. It was like a ghost had done it. I stood there for a few more minutes, my skin crawling, feeling completely exposed in the circle of my flashlight beam. The darkness around us felt alive and hostile. I finally went back inside, zipped the tent up, and told my dad I didn't see anything. We didn't say another word. I don't think either of us slept after that. We just lay there in the dark, listening. Then, maybe an hour or two later, it happened. I was lying on my back, staring up at the dark ceiling of the tent, every muscle in my body wound tight. I heard a twig snap, close by, really close. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. It was right outside, and then it roared. There are no words that can really describe it. It wasn't an animal sound. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a cougar. It was a roar. But it was layered, deafening. The closest thing I can say is that it sounded like a freight train was materializing right next to our tent. It was a deep, guttural, screaming roar that seemed to come from a chest bigger than any animal I've ever known. It was so loud it was painful, like it was vibrating the air itself, pressing in on my eardrums. The sheer volume of it was overwhelming, paralyzing, but the worst part was the terror that came with it. It wasn't just a sound, it was a feeling. A wave of pure primal fear washed over me. It was a sensation of being small, of being prey, of being completely and utterly vulnerable. I felt a hot rush of urine soak my long johns. I didn't even consciously do it. My body just gave out. I curled into a ball, my hands clamped over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was inside my head. I was shaking uncontrollably, my teeth chattering. I think I was whimpering. I've never felt a fear like that, before or since. It was a fear that bypassed your brain and went straight to your lizard spine, screaming that you are about to die. It lasted for maybe 4 or 5 seconds, and then it stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. It was a void. My ears were ringing. I could hear my dad gasping next to me. I don't know how long we stayed like that, huddled in our sleeping bags, but eventually a different kind of adrenaline took over, the kind that makes you run. "We have to get out of the tent," my dad hissed. "Now!" We scrambled out, knives in hand, flashlights sweeping wildly. We stood back to back, spinning in slow circles, shining our lights into the impenetrable wall of black trees. We saw nothing. We heard nothing. The air didn't smell like anything unusual. No musky odor, no rot, nothing. Just clean, cold mountain air. We checked the ground all around the tent again. The pine needle floor was undisturbed. No tracks. Nothing. It was as if the sound, the sheer physical force of that roar, had come from nowhere. We didn't sleep another wink. We stayed up, sitting on logs by the remains of our fire, not talking much, just staring into the dark with our rifles across our laps, jumping at every little sound, until the sky finally began to lighten from black to grey. When the sun was fully up, the world looked normal again. The birds were singing. It was hard to believe the night had even happened. We were packing up our gear, both of us silent and exhausted, when my dad stopped and pointed. About 80 yards away, at the edge of the meadow, stood 3 elk, a bull and 2 cows. They were just standing there, grazing, completely calm. They hadn't smelled us or spooked, and that's when the final piece clicked into place. The piece that still messes with my head, those elk. They were right there. If a bear or a cougar had been in our camp roaring like that, those elk would have been long gone. They wouldn't have been hanging around, placid as could be. Whatever was at our tent last night wasn't something those elk were afraid of, or it wasn't something that was interested in them. We got out of there as fast as we could. We didn't even bother hunting. We just packed up and hiked the 10 miles back to the truck, looking over our shoulders the whole way. I've replayed that night in my head 1,000 times. The two knocks, my pathetic response, the one loud answering knock that was a warning, the slap on the tent, and that roar, that god-awful roar. I've read stories about this area, about Bigfoot activity. I never put much stock in it before. I do now. I don't know what else it could have been. I don't have any proof, no pictures, no tracks, no hair. Just the memory of a sound that doesn't belong in this world, and a fear so deep and complete that it feels branded onto my soul. We went out there to hunt elk, and I think something else ended up hunting us, or at least it was letting us know we were in its house. I still can't explain it. I don't think I ever will. Story 14. Okay, so I've been sitting on this for a long time, and I guess now's as good a time as any to get it out. I'm Shannon Morgan, and this happened back in 1986. I was deer hunting alone, like I did most mornings during the season. I've had a few weird moments in those woods over the years. Nothing too crazy, just little things that made the hair on my arms stand up. But this one day, it was different. It stuck with me, and even now, decades later, I can still feel that cold knot in my stomach when I think about it. That morning, I woke up way before the sun even thought about rising. It was one of those crisp autumn days where the air feels sharp in your lungs, and you can see your breath hanging in front of you like a ghost. I didn't bother with coffee or anything. I just pulled on my layers, thick flannel, my old camo jacket, and a pair of jeans that had seen better days. My boots were caked in mud from the day before, but I laced them up tight. I grabbed my rifle, a trusty .30-06 that had been in the family for years, and headed out the door without making a sound. My wife was still asleep, and I didn't want to wake her. She never liked me hunting alone, said it was too isolated out there, but I loved the solitude, still do most days. The drive to the ridge was short, maybe 20 minutes on dirt roads that twisted through the hills. I parked my truck at the usual spot, where the trees thinned out enough to let you see the sky. It was still dark, but the stars were fading, and that deep blue of pre-dawn was starting to creep in. I remember the crunch of gravel under my tires as I pulled over, and how the engine ticked as it cooled down. I sat there for a minute, just listening to the silence. It's not really silent, though, not in the woods. There's always something rustling, a bird chirping somewhere, or the wind brushing through the pines. But that morning it felt heavier, like the world was holding its breath. I got out and shouldered my rifle, the weight familiar and comforting. The ridge isn't too steep, but it's thick with oaks and maples, and the leaves were everywhere, dry and brittle from the cold. Every step I took sounded like I was walking on potato chips. I found my spot pretty quick, a little clearing where I'd set up a makeshift blind a few weeks back. It was just a fallen log and some brush piled around it, but it gave me a good view of a game trail that cut through the trees. I settled in, my back against the log, and waited. The sky was turning from blue to a soft gray, and I could just make out the shapes of trees around me. My breath fogged in the air, and I tucked my chin into my collar to keep warm. For the first hour or so, everything was normal. I heard a squirrel chattering somewhere off to my left, and a couple of birds started up their morning songs. I was scanning the trail, my finger resting lightly on the trigger guard, when I heard it. At first, I thought it was just more squirrels or maybe a deer moving through the underbrush. But then it got clearer. It sounded like two kids, just tromping through the leaves, not running, not sneaking, but walking with purpose, like they were on their way to somewhere. The steps were light but distinct, crunch, 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 and they were coming from behind me up the ridge. I froze. My heart started thumping in my chest, hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. Kids? Out here? At dawn? That didn't make any sense. The nearest house was miles away, and nobody in their right mind would let their kids wander these woods alone, especially not in hunting season. I slowly turned my head, trying to see without making noise. The leaves were so dry that even the slightest movement sounded loud, so I stayed still as I could, just listening. The steps kept coming, getting closer. They were definitely bipedal, like someone walking on 2 feet, but lighter than an adult. I could hear them clearly now. Crunch, crunch, pause, crunch, and it sounded like they were maybe 30, 40 yards away. I held my breath, my eyes straining against the dim light. The trees were thick there, shadows everywhere, and I couldn't see anything moving, but I could hear them, and they were close enough that I should have been able to spot them. Then, just like that, they stopped. Not gradually, but all at once. 1 second there was that steady crunching, and the next dead silence. It was so sudden that it felt like someone had flipped a switch. The birds had gone quiet too, like they were waiting. I stayed frozen, my muscles tense, and I could feel the cold seeping through my clothes. My hands were gripping the rifle so tight that my knuckles ached. For a minute or so, nothing happened. I just sat there, listening to the blood pounding in my ears. Then I heard something else, a heavier step. This one was different. It wasn't light or quick. It was slow, deliberate, like a big man walking carefully. Thump, thump, thump. It came from the same direction as the smaller steps, but it sounded bigger, heavier. My mind raced. Was it a bear? Bears can walk on 2 legs sometimes, but this didn't sound like any bear I'd ever heard. It was too steady, too even, and it was joining them, whatever they were. The smaller steps had stopped, and now this larger thing was there. I didn't hear any greeting, no sounds of interaction, just silence. Complete, utter silence. It lasted for what felt like forever. I checked my watch later, and it was only about 3 minutes, but in that moment it stretched out like hours. I could feel every second tick by, and the fear was building inside me, cold and sharp. I wasn't just scared of what I might see, I was scared of what I couldn't see, because in that silence, I got this overwhelming sense that they knew I was there. Not just that they heard me, but that they were aware of me, like they'd pinpointed my exact location and were deciding what to do about it. I didn't move a muscle. My breath was shallow, and I tried to make myself smaller, pressing into the log. The air felt thick, charged with something I couldn't name. It wasn't just fear, it was this primal dread, like I was prey being watched by something that saw right through me. I kept my eyes fixed on where the sounds had come from, but the trees were too dense, and the light was still poor. All I could see were shadows and shapes. Nothing definite. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the smaller steps started up again. But this time, they were moving away. Not randomly, not like they were scattering. They retreated in a straight line, back the way they'd come. Crunch, crunch, crunch in perfect unison, like soldiers marching. No hesitation, no deviation, and the larger one followed. Its steps were slower, heavier, but just as steady. Thump, thump, thump. It didn't rush. It just moved after them, calm and controlled. I listened until the sounds faded into the distance, swallowed by the woods. The birds started chirping again, slowly at first, then all at once, like someone had given them the all clear. But I didn't move. I stayed there, hunched against the log, for I don't know how long. My legs were cramping, and my hands were numb from the cold, but I couldn't bring myself to stand up. The fear had rooted me to the spot. When I finally did move, it was slow, stiff. I stood up and looked around, but there was nothing to see. No tracks, no broken branches, nothing out of the ordinary. Just the same old woods, with the sun now peeking over the horizon, casting long shadows. I should have felt relieved, but I didn't. That sense of being watched was gone. but it left behind this deep unease, like I'd been brushed by something I couldn't understand. I packed up my gear and headed back to the truck. My steps hurried. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see something following me, but there was nothing. The drive home was a blur. I remember my hands shaking on the steering wheel, and I had to pull over once to catch my breath. When I got home, my wife asked if I'd gotten anything, and I just shook my head. I didn't tell her what happened. How could I? It sounded crazy even in my own head. That was it. That one morning in 1986, I've been back to that ridge since, but I've never felt the same way. Sometimes I wonder if it was just my imagination, if the isolation and the early hour played tricks on me. But I know what I heard. Those steps, the silence, the way they moved, it was too real. And that feeling, that palpable awareness they had of me, that's what haunts me. They knew I was there, and they chose to avoid me like I was nothing to worry about. I can't explain it, and I doubt I ever will. It just happened, and it left me with this chill that never really goes away. Story 15. Okay, so I've never really told this to anyone outside my family, and even then, it's not something I like to bring up. But I feel like I need to get it out there, because it's been eating at me for years, and maybe writing it down will help, or maybe it'll just make it worse. I don't know. This happened back in 1837, when I was 16 years old. I was working out in the backwoods near Silver Lake Township, Pennsylvania, where my family had a small homestead. It was just an ordinary day at first, or as ordinary as days got out there. But it turned into something I still can't wrap my head around. That morning, I remember waking up early, like I always did. The sun was just starting to peek through the trees, and the air had that cool, damp feel that clung to your skin. I was used to the woods. I'd been helping my pa with chores since I was little, things like chopping firewood, checking traps, or clearing brush. We didn't have much, so every pair of hands counted. My younger brothers were supposed to be helping me that day, but they'd wandered off earlier, probably chasing squirrels or something. They were always getting distracted, and I didn't mind too much because it meant I could work at my own pace. I was out by the edge of a dense patch of forest, about a half-mile from our cabin. The trees were thick there, mostly pine and oak, with this heavy canopy that made everything feel darker, even in the daytime. I had an axe with me, and I was splitting logs for the winter. The sound of the axe hitting wood was rhythmic, almost calming, and I'd gotten into a groove. Sweat was dripping down my back, and my hands were starting to blister under my gloves, but it was familiar work. I remember thinking about how quiet it was. Not silent, but the usual sounds of birds chirping and leaves rustling. It was peaceful, or so I thought. Then, around mid-morning, I started hearing this whistling. At first, I didn't think much of it. My brothers were always whistling or humming when they played. It was like their way of keeping each other company. This whistling sounded merry, almost cheerful, like a tune you'd hear someone humming while they worked. I figured it was them coming back from wherever they'd wandered off to. The sound was coming from deeper in the woods, not too far away, and it seemed to be getting closer. I paused my chopping and listened for a minute. It was a simple melody, nothing fancy, but it had this odd, lilting quality that made it stick in your head. I called out, "That you, boys?" But there was no answer, just the whistling continuing. I shrugged it off and went back to work, assuming they were just fooling around and ignoring me. But after a few minutes, the whistling stopped abruptly. It wasn't a gradual fade, it just cut off, like someone had clamped a hand over their mouth. That's when I felt the first prickle of unease. The woods went dead quiet, like all the birds had stopped singing at once. I set my axe down and wiped the sweat from my forehead, peering into the trees. The light was dappled, with shadows shifting in the breeze, and for a second I thought I saw movement. Then I saw it. About 16 feet away, right where the tree line started to thicken, there was this figure. At first glance, I thought it was one of my brothers, maybe the youngest, who was about 6 or 7 years old. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized it wasn't human, not fully anyway. It was covered in this thick, matted black hair from head to toe, like some kind of animal, but it stood upright like a person. Its size was what threw me off. It was small, about the height of my little brother, but stockier, with broad shoulders and arms that hung a bit too long. The face was mostly hidden by hair, but I could make out dark eyes that seemed to gleam in the shadows. It didn't move, just stood there, and I swear it was looking right at me. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. For a second I froze, my mind trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it a bear? No, bears don't stand like that, and they sure as hell don't whistle. This thing had been whistling moments before. The terror hit me all at once, a cold, sinking feeling in my gut that spread through my whole body. My legs felt weak, and I could hear my own breathing, ragged and too loud. I took a step back, and that's when it moved. Not aggressively, but it shifted its weight, and I saw its feet. They were bare, human-like, but covered in that same dark hair. I don't know how long we stood there staring at each other, maybe only a few seconds. But it felt like an eternity. My first instinct was to run, but I was rooted to the spot. Then I remembered my pa's rifle back at the cabin. We kept it for protection against wolves or other threats, but I'd never had to use it in a situation like this. Without thinking, I turned and bolted. I didn't look back. I just ran as fast as I could, my boots slipping on the damp leaves and roots. The distance to the cabin wasn't far, but it felt like miles. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made me flinch, expecting that thing to be right behind me. When I reached the cabin, I burst through the door, my chest heaving. My pa was inside mending a harness, and he looked up, startled. "What's wrong?" he asked, but I didn't have the breath to explain. I just pointed back toward the woods and stumbled to where the rifle was leaning against the wall. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip it. I fumbled with the powder horn and shot, my fingers clumsy and numb. Pa came over, his face concerned, and he helped me load it, but I could see he didn't fully understand yet. "There's something out there," I managed to gasp. "In the woods. It looks like a boy, but it's covered in hair." Pa's expression hardened, and he grabbed his own axe. "Show me," he said. We hurried back outside, and I led the way toward where I'd seen the thing. My whole body was trembling, and I had to force myself to keep moving. The woods seemed darker now, the shadows deeper, and every sound made my skin crawl. When we got to the spot, it was still there. Or at least I thought it was. It was standing in the same place, just watching us. Up close I could see more details. The hair was coarse and tangled, like it had never been brushed, and it had a musky, earthy smell that carried on the wind. It didn't make a sound, but its eyes never left me. I raised the rifle, but my arms were shaking so much I couldn't keep it steady. The barrel wavered, and I had to brace it against my shoulder, but even then, my aim was all over the place. Pa was beside me, his voice low and steady. "Take your time, son. Breathe." But I couldn't breathe. My lungs felt tight, and I was on the verge of hyperventilating. I squeezed the trigger, and the shot rang out, loud and sharp in the quiet woods. The recoil jarred my shoulder, and for a second I couldn't see anything through the smoke. When it cleared, the thing was gone. It had stepped behind a large oak tree just as I fired, and now it was darting off into the deeper woods. I caught a glimpse of it moving. It was fast, unnaturally fast, weaving between trees like it knew the forest better than we did. And as it disappeared, I heard it start whistling again, that same merry tune, like nothing had happened. I just stood there frozen, the rifle still in my hands. My ears were ringing from the shot, and my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Pa put a hand on my shoulder, and I realized I was crying. Big, heaving sobs that I couldn't control. I dropped the rifle and sank to my knees, the fear and adrenaline crashing down on me all at once. Pa helped me up and led me back to the cabin, his arm around me. He didn't say much, but later he told me he believed me. He said he'd seen tracks and heard stories from other folks in the area, but he'd never seen anything like it himself. The rest of that day is a blur. I remember sitting by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, but I couldn't stop shaking. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that hairy figure staring at me, or I heard that whistling in my head. I burst out crying a few times, just out of nowhere, and Pa would pat my back and tell me it was okay, but I knew it wasn't. That thing was out there, and it had gotten away. We never found any trace of it after that. No tracks, no hair, nothing. It was like it vanished into thin air, but I know what I saw, and I know how it made me feel. Even now, years later, I get chills thinking about it. I've never gone back into those woods alone, and I doubt I ever will. Sometimes when the wind is just right, I swear I can still hear that whistling, and it sends a shiver down my spine. I don't know what it was. Some kind of wild boy, an animal, or something else entirely, but it was real and it happened to me, and I'll never forget it. Story 16. I still remember that day like it was yesterday, even though it was years ago when I was just a kid. We'd moved from Virginia to Pennsylvania not long before, and my friend and I were always out in the woods, trying to make sense of the new place. It was our escape, you know? Just two boys with fishing poles and a tent, thinking we were invincible. But that one trip changed everything. I've never talked about this much, not even to my family, because who would believe it? But I need to get it out there, because the fear still sneaks up on me sometimes, especially when I'm near any kind of forest. It was a warm summer day, the kind where the air feels thick and heavy, and the sunlight filters through the trees in these lazy golden streaks. We'd set up camp the night before, near this old train trestle that stretched over a creek. The trestle was rusted and creaky, something out of an old movie, and the creek below was shallow but fast-moving, with rocks that made this constant, soothing gurgle. We spent that first evening fishing, catching a couple of small trout, and just messing around like kids do. We built a fire as it got dark, the flames crackling and sending sparks up into the night sky. Everything felt normal, peaceful even. But then, as night fell, the woods went dead silent. I mean, completely quiet. No crickets, no owls, nothing. It was eerie, like someone had flipped a switch. We heard these little plinking sounds like pebbles hitting the water from the ridge above us. It was steep up there, covered in trees and loose rocks. My friend and I looked at each other, and I remember him whispering, "Probably just a black bear." We'd seen bears before back in Virginia, so it made sense. We stoked the fire higher, trying to feel safer, and eventually crawled into our sleeping bags. But I didn't sleep much. Every little noise had me jerking awake, my heart thumping in my chest. It was one of those nights where you just lie there, staring at the tent ceiling, waiting for dawn. When morning finally came, the sun was just starting to light up the sky in these pale shades of pink and orange. We unzipped the tent and stepped out, and that's when we saw it. Our campsite was wrecked, totally destroyed. The fishing gear we'd left outside was scattered everywhere. One of the rods snapped in half. Our cooler was tipped over, its lid hanging off, and the food we'd packed, mostly chips and soda, was strewn around like someone had tossed it in a fit. The fire pit was a mess, ashes kicked all over, and there were these deep, muddy footprints around the tent. Not like deer prints or anything small. These were big, like someone wearing huge boots, but messier, more spread out. My friend pointed at them, his hand shaking, and we just stood there frozen. I felt this cold knot tighten in my stomach. We tried to tell ourselves it was that bear again, maybe a big one, but something didn't feel right. Bears don't usually leave prints that look so human-like, but not quite. We spent the next couple of hours cleaning up what we could, our voices hushed, like we were afraid to make too much noise. The woods had come back to life a bit. Birds were chirping, the creek was babbling. but there was still this underlying tension, like the forest was holding its breath. We decided to stick around for a while longer, maybe fish a little more before heading home. I think part of us wanted to prove we weren't scared, but honestly, I was trembling inside. Every rustle in the bushes made me jump. Then, around mid-morning, the pebbles started again. That same plinking sound, stones hitting the water in the creek from up on the ridge. At first, it was just a few here and there, but then it got more frequent, like someone was tossing them one after another. We looked up, squinting against the sun, but we couldn't see anything through the thick trees. My friend muttered, "It's back," and I could hear the fear in his voice. My own throat felt dry, and I had to swallow hard. We stood by the creek, our fishing forgotten, just listening. That's when we heard the pacing. It was a heavy, rhythmic sound, like something big walking back and forth on the ridge above us. Thump, 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 not fast, but steady, and it sent chills down my spine. Each step sounded like it had weight behind it, like a person, but heavier, much heavier. We backed away from the creek, closer to the remains of our camp, and I remember my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might burst out. The pacing went on for what felt like forever, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, but it could have been less. Time gets weird when you're scared like that. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was even worse, thick and oppressive. We didn't move, didn't speak. I could feel the sweat trickling down my back, cold despite the warm air, and that's when we saw it. Something started coming down the ridge. At first it was just a shape moving through the trees, big and dark, but as it got closer, I could make out more details. It was massive, like the size of a small car, but built like a tank, broad shoulders, thick legs, covered in dark, matted hair that looked almost black in the light. It moved with this slow, deliberate grace, not clumsy like a bear, but powerful, like it owned the place. It didn't run or scramble. It just walked down the steep slope, like it was nothing, its feet digging into the earth with each step. My breath caught in my throat, and I think I stopped breathing altogether. This thing was huge, taller than any man I'd ever seen, and its arms hung down long, almost to its knees. It didn't look at us at first. It just kept coming, heading straight for the creek. The sound of its footsteps was a low, heavy thud that vibrated through the ground, and I could feel it in my bones. My friend was beside me, and I heard this tiny whimper escape him. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like jelly, rooted to the spot. It reached the creek bank and paused for a second, its head turning slightly toward us. That's when I saw its face, or what I could see of it. It was mostly hidden by hair, but I caught a glimpse of dark, deep-set eyes that seemed to lock onto us. Then it stepped into the water. The creek was only knee-deep for us, but for this thing it barely came up to its shins. It didn't splash or struggle, it just waded in, the water swirling around its legs, and then it growled. That sound, I'll never forget it. It wasn't like a bear's growl, which is guttural and rough. This was deeper, more primal, like a rumble that started low and built into this roar that echoed off the trees. It vibrated through the air, and I felt it in my chest, like someone had punched me. The fear hit me all at once, so intense that my bladder let go. I didn't even realize it at first, but warm wetness spread down my legs, and I saw my friend had done the same. We were both standing there, pissing ourselves, too terrified to move. The creature took 2 huge strides across the creek, its legs covering the distance in seconds, and then it was on the other side. It didn't look back. It just kept walking, disappearing into the trees on the far bank. The whole thing probably lasted less than a minute, but it felt like a lifetime. As soon as it was gone, the spell broke. We didn't say a word. We just turned and ran. I don't even remember deciding to run. It was pure instinct. We left everything behind, the tent, the fishing gear, our backpacks, all of it. We scrambled up the bank, our feet slipping on loose dirt, and bolted through the woods toward the road. Running through those trees, I've never been so scared in my life. Every branch that snapped underfoot made me flinch, expecting that thing to be right behind us. My lungs burned and my legs ached. but I didn't stop until we reached the gravel road where we'd parked our bikes. We jumped on them and pedaled like hell, not looking back. The whole way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see it following us. When we got back, we were a mess, covered in dirt, shaking and smelling of urine. My mom took one look at us and knew something was wrong. We tried to explain, but it came out in a jumble of words. She called the local DNR, and later that day, an officer came out to talk to us. We took him back to the campsite, my hands still trembling the whole way. He looked around, saw the footprints, and made casts of them. I remember him kneeling down, studying them, and then he stood up and said, "Looks like a bear, kids, a big one." He was trying to be reassuring, I think, but I knew it wasn't a bear. I'd seen bears, and this was nothing like that. The footprints were too big, too human-like, and the way it moved, it was just wrong. We never went back to that spot. For years afterward, I had nightmares about that growl, that massive shape coming down the ridge. It altered how I see the woods forever. Before, they were a place of adventure. Now they feel watchful, like something's always hiding just out of sight. I've never been able to explain what it was, not really. People say it must have been a bear or a hoax, but I know what I saw. And sometimes when I'm lying awake at night, I can still hear those pebbles hitting the water. And I feel that same cold fear wash over me all over again. Story 17. It was one of those perfect late summer mornings in the Uinta Mountains, the kind where the air is so clean and cool it feels like you're drinking it instead of breathing it. My sister Claire and I had decided on a spur-of-the-moment day hike. We'd been on this particular trail a dozen times before. It was our comfort hike, the one we did when we didn't want to think about maps or gear, just walk and talk. We started around mid-morning, I'd say maybe 10 o'clock. The sun was warm on our shoulders, but the shade under the pine trees was still chilly. We were just wearing t-shirts and hiking pants, our light packs carrying water and some snacks. The trail starts in a thick forest of lodgepole pines, then opens up into these huge rolling meadows. That day the meadows were this incredible golden color, the grass gone to seed and shimmering in the light. It was so quiet. The only sounds were our boots on the dirt and the buzzing of a few lazy insects. We'd been walking for maybe an hour and a half when we decided to take a break. We found a flat rock at the edge of one of the big meadows and sat down to have some water and a granola bar. We weren't really talking about anything important, just the usual stuff. Work, our parents, a movie we'd both seen. I was looking down, fiddling with the wrapper on my bar, when Claire went completely still beside me. I heard her suck in a sharp little breath, the kind you take when you see a car almost hit another car. "What?" I said, looking up at her. She wasn't looking at me. Her eyes were locked on something way out across the meadow, her face frozen. I followed her gaze, and I saw it. Way out there, maybe 300, 400 yards away, moving along the tree line on the other side of the meadow, was a figure. My first stupid thought was, that's a really tall hiker. But it was all wrong. It was just massive. It had to be 9 feet tall, maybe 10. It was covered in what looked like reddish-brown hair, but it was thick, like a really shaggy carpet. The sun hit it, and it almost seemed to glow in patches. It was walking. No, walking isn't the right word. It was striding. Its legs were so long, and it moved with this glide. The meadow wasn't flat. It was hummocky, full of tussocks of grass and hidden dips, the kind of terrain that makes you watch your step. But this thing didn't seem to notice. It didn't bob up and down like a person would. It just moved forward in a straight, steady line, its arms swinging slightly at its sides. It was covering ground at an impossible speed. I'm not good at judging distances, but I remember thinking, that's a football field, and it crossed that entire open space in what felt like less than a minute. We were both just frozen on our rock. I don't think I breathed. My granola bar was still clutched in my hand, forgotten. This wasn't excitement or curiosity. This was a deep, cold dread that started in my stomach and just spread outwards, making my fingers feel numb. My brain was screaming that this was wrong, that nothing that big should move that smoothly, that quietly. There was no sound, no cracking twigs, no heavy footfalls, just this silent, powerful progression through the golden grass. We watched it, our eyes glued to it as it headed towards a small, treeless hill that rose up before the main tree line. It was going to go over the crest. Part of me was praying it would just keep going, that it would disappear over that hill, and that would be the end of it. We could sit here for a minute, try to laugh it off, call it a bear, even though we both knew it was no bear. A bear is a compact, powerful thing on 4 legs. This was upright. This was built like a person, but a person stretched and thickened into something else entirely. It reached the base of the hill and started up. Its gait didn't change. It didn't slow down or lean forward to climb. It just glided up the slope like it was walking on a pavement sidewalk. My heart was hammering against my ribs now, a frantic, bird-like fluttering. I could feel Claire trembling next to me, her shoulder pressed against mine. Then it happened. It was almost at the crest of the hill. One more step and it would be gone, and it stopped. It just stopped dead. My breath caught in my throat. The thing stood there on the hilltop, silhouetted against the bright blue sky. It was immense. The sheer bulk of it was staggering. And then, slowly, it turned its upper body. It turned its head. It was looking right at us. The distance was still great, but the details hit me with a physical force. It had a broad, flat head with a heavy, protruding brow that shadowed its face. The face itself, it was dark. Not black, but a dark, grayish brown, like wet clay. I couldn't make out individual features, no eyes or a nose, just that dark, leathery-looking skin in the shadow of that heavy brow. There was no expression. It wasn't angry or curious. It was just looking. That was the most terrifying moment of my life. That silent, focused attention. It knew we were there. It had known the whole time. The feeling of being seen by that thing was worse than anything I've ever felt. It was a primal, gut-level fear. Every hair on my arms and neck stood up. My mouth went completely dry. I felt a cold sweat break out all over my body. I wanted to run, to scream, to hide, but I was paralyzed. I couldn't even look away. I was trapped in its gaze. It felt like an hour, but it was probably only 3 or 4 seconds. It just held us there, pinned. Then, as smoothly as it had stopped, it turned its head back, faced forward, and took one more long, gliding step. It went over the crest of the hill and vanished. Just like that, it was gone. The spell broke. I gasped like I'd been holding my breath the whole time. I looked at Claire. Her face was white as a sheet, her eyes wide with pure, unadulterated shock. We didn't say a word. We just stared at the empty hilltop. The meadow was just a meadow again. The grass was just grass. The world was normal, but it wasn't. It was forever different. After a full minute of just sitting there, shaking, Claire finally moved. She slowly, carefully, packed her half-eaten granola bar back into her pack. Her hands were trembling so badly she could barely zip the pocket. I did the same, my own movements clumsy and slow. We stood up. My legs felt like jelly. I thought I might just fall over. We didn't discuss it. We didn't say, "Did you see that?" or "What was that?" We just started walking. We got back on the trail, which continued along the edge of the meadow, skirting the area where we'd seen it. We walked in a silence so heavy, it was like a physical weight on our shoulders. We weren't enjoying the hike anymore. We were just moving, putting one foot in front of the other, our senses screaming. Every rustle in the bushes to our left made me jump. Every snap of a twig sounded like a gunshot. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see that dark, massive figure standing there watching us from the trees. The forest that had felt so peaceful and familiar on the way in now felt menacing. The shadows between the pines were too dark. The spaces were too quiet. Every stump or oddly shaped rock looked, for a heart-stopping second, like it was about to move. My body was flooded with adrenaline. I was hyper-aware of everything. The smell of the pine sap, the feel of the gravel under my boots, the way the light dappled through the canopy. But it wasn't a pleasant awareness. It was the awareness of prey. We didn't stop again. We didn't take any more pictures. We just power-walked the entire rest of the loop, probably cutting an hour off our usual time. We were almost running by the end, our breath coming in ragged pants, not from exertion but from sheer, undiluted fear. We just wanted to be back at the car, to be in a metal box, to be moving away from this place. When we finally broke out of the trees and saw the parking lot, the dusty gravel and the few other cars, it was like surfacing from a nightmare. We practically ran to our car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands still shaking, and finally got the door unlocked. We threw our packs in the back and got in, slamming the doors shut. I locked them immediately. The thunk of the locks a tiny, pathetic comfort. I started the car and we just sat there for a minute, the engine running, both of us staring straight ahead. The silence in the car was even heavier than the silence on the trail. Finally, Claire spoke, her voice hoarse and quiet. "We need to write this down." I just nodded. I dug in the glove compartment and found an old receipt and a pen. We sat in that car for another 20 minutes, taking turns writing, describing everything we could remember. The height, the color of the hair, not just brown, but a reddish brown, like an Irish setter. The way it moved, that gliding, unstoppable motion, the broad head, the heavy brow, the dark, grayish-brown skin on its face, the sheer, silent power of it. We compared notes, making sure we had the details right. It wasn't a debate. We both knew exactly what we had seen. We drove home in near silence, the radio off. The image of it was burned into the back of my eyelids. That moment, it turned. That moment it looked at us. I can close my eyes right now and see it as clearly as I did that day, standing on that hilltop. It wasn't monstrous in a movie way. It wasn't roaring or beating its chest. It was majestic, in a way that makes you feel tiny and insignificant, and it was frightening on a level I didn't know existed. It was the fear of something that doesn't belong in your understanding of the world. Something so much older and stronger and more real than you are. We've talked about it a few times since, always in hushed tones. We never came up with an explanation. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man in a suit. It was what it was. We both know it. And that knowledge sits inside me, a cold, hard stone. I still go hiking, but I never feel completely alone in the woods anymore. I'm always listening. I'm always watching the tree line, and sometimes, when the wind is just right and the light is low, I get that same cold feeling in my stomach, and I remember the way it moved. And I just know, that we were seen by something that wasn't ever supposed to see us. Story 18. It was the middle of the 1970s. Me and my brother Frank were teenagers then. We lived in our village in southwest Alaska, one of those places where everyone knows everyone and not much ever happens, especially in the dead of winter. The days are short and the nights are long and dark, and you find ways to keep from going crazy with boredom. That night, we were in our house, just me and Frank. Our parents were visiting relatives in the next village over, a trip they made every few months. They'd left the day before and weren't due back until the next afternoon. So it was just us two, which meant we could stay up as late as we wanted, no one to tell us to go to bed. We were playing cards at the kitchen table, just a simple game, nothing special. The room was warm from the wood stove, and the only light came from a single kerosene lamp on the table, throwing long, shaky shadows on the walls. Outside, it was pitch black and dead quiet. The kind of quiet you only get out here, where there's no roads, no cars, just the wind and the trees. We'd been playing for a couple hours, just talking about nothing, school, girls, the usual stuff, when the dogs started up. We had a few sled dogs tied up outside, and they were good dogs, not the type to bark at nothing. At first, it was just a few warning barks, the kind they make when a fox or a rabbit gets too close. We didn't think much of it. Frank just shrugged and said, "Probably a bear nosing around the trash." Bears weren't uncommon, especially if they were hungry and came down from the hills. We figured it would sniff around, find nothing, and move on. But the barking didn't stop. It got more intense, more frantic. It wasn't just one dog anymore. It was all of them, howling and yelping like they were trying to tear their chains loose. The sound was sharp and ugly in the quiet night. I remember feeling a little prickle on the back of my neck, a feeling that something wasn't right. I looked at Frank, and he had that same look, his card-playing, relaxed posture gone, his body tensed up, listening. Then we heard it, a sound at the door. It wasn't a knock. It was a fumbling, a scraping, like someone was messing with the latch. Our front door had a simple metal latch, the kind you lift with your thumb. It made a very distinct metallic click-clack sound when you operated it. And that's what we heard. Click and clack, then a soft thud like a shoulder pressing against the wood. My heart just dropped into my stomach. Frank's eyes were wide, locked on mine. We were frozen. No one should have been out there. It was the middle of the night, miles from the next house. Who would be messing with our door? "Who's there?" Frank shouted, his voice tighter and higher than usual. No answer. The fumbling stopped for a second, and then we heard footsteps on the porch. Heavy, slow footsteps. They moved away from the door and around the side of the house. We had a broken window on that side, in a little storage room we barely used. A pane of glass had been cracked for months, and we'd just stuffed a piece of plywood in it from the inside, but there were still jagged pieces of glass stuck in the frame around the edges. We heard the footsteps stop right outside that window. Then there was a sound of scraping wood. It sounded like the plywood was being pushed from the outside. We were still sitting at the table, too scared to move. I could feel my own pulse hammering in my throat. Then a shadow fell over the plywood, blocking what little moonlight was coming through the cracks around it. And then a hand, or something like a hand, came through the gap between the plywood and the window frame, reaching into the house. I can still see it perfectly. It was huge, not fat, but long-fingered and powerful-looking, covered in thick, dark hair, almost black. It was groping around blindly in the air of our storage room. The arm was incredibly long, and it was stretching way in. Like whatever was attached to it was tall enough to just reach in without much effort. That's when it happened. The hand, or whatever it was, brushed against one of the shards of glass, still stuck in the window frame. There was a sharp, wet, tearing sound, and the hand jerked back violently. A few dark drops of something splattered onto the plywood and the floorboards inside. It was blood. It had to be. A second later, we heard a heavy, thudding sound from outside, like someone jumping off the porch, and then the sound of running, fast and heavy, fading into the trees. For a long moment, Frank and I just sat there, breathing hard, not saying a word. The dogs were still going crazy. The fear that had frozen us started to melt, replaced by a shaky, jittery feeling. "What the hell was that?" I finally whispered. Frank stood up, his chair scraping loud on the floor. "Had to be one of the guys from Klaguk," he said, trying to sound tough, but I could hear the tremor in his voice. Klaguk was another village a few miles away. Sometimes the teenagers from there would come over to play pranks, though never this late and never something this aggressive. Trying to scare us, probably cut his hand good on that glass. Serves him right. It made a weird kind of sense. A prankster. It explained the fumbling at the door, the reaching in. It explained the blood. We wanted to believe it. We needed to believe it. We talked ourselves into it, our voices getting louder and more confident as we did. "Yeah, just some idiot from Klaguk. We should go out there and see if we can find him, teach him a lesson." The bravado was fake, but it got us moving. We put on our boots and our heavy coats. Frank grabbed our dad's rifle from the corner, just in case it really was a bear. I picked up the big, heavy-duty flashlight. My hands were still shaking so bad I could barely click the switch on. We stepped out onto the porch. The cold hit us like a wall, so sharp it made my lungs ache. The air was dead still. The dogs had finally quieted down, just whining softly in their spots. Everything was covered in a thick layer of snow, and the moon was almost full, casting a pale blue-white light over everything, making the snow glitter. It was so bright, we could see pretty clearly. We looked around. There were no fresh footprints on the porch except our own. That was the first thing that felt wrong. If someone had jumped off, there should have been a mark in the snow below the porch. There was nothing, just smooth, unbroken snow. Then we saw the blood, a few dark, almost black drops on the white wood of the porch, railing near the broken window, and a smeared trail leading down the steps. We followed it with the flashlight beam. The drops led away from the house, across the open yard, and into the tree line. "See?" Frank said, his breath puffing out in a cloud. "He's cut. He can't have gone far." We followed the trail. The blood spots were big and easy to see against the snow. They led us past the dog yard, where the dogs were now just watching us, their ears perked up, and into the sparse alder trees at the edge of our property. The trail was headed up the first hill. We were walking fast, our boots crunching in the snow, the beam of the flashlight jerking around with every step I took. We were about 50 yards from the house, starting up the gentle slope of the hill, when Frank stopped dead. He grabbed my arm, his grip so tight it hurt. "Don," he whispered, and the sound of his voice, so quiet and full of pure dread, made my blood run cold. I looked up from the blood trail, following his gaze, and I saw it. It was standing at the top of the first hill, maybe 150 yards away, just beyond the last of the alders, in a small clearing where the moonlight fell directly. It was standing on two legs, looking right at us. It was massive. I'm not talking about a big guy. I'm talking about something else entirely. Frank and I were both tall for our age, already over 6 feet. This thing had to be over 4 feet taller than us, 10 feet tall, easy. Its body was thick and powerful looking, covered in that same long, shaggy, dark hair I'd seen on the hand. Its arms were ridiculously long, hanging down past its knees. The head was big and kind of cone-shaped, sitting on broad shoulders with no real neck to speak of. But the worst part was its face. Or what I could see of it in the moonlight. It wasn't a bear's face. It was vaguely human. I could make out a heavy brow ridge and the suggestion of a flat nose and a strong jaw. It was just standing there, completely still, watching us. I felt this wave of terror wash over me so completely that for a second I thought I might pass out. My legs felt like water. This wasn't a person. This wasn't a bear. This was something I had no name for. Then Frank did something stupid, or brave. I still don't know. He raised the rifle and fired a shot into the air. The bang was incredibly loud, shattering the silence. The creature didn't flinch. It didn't run. It just stood there for another second, and then it turned. Not like a man turns, pivoting on his feet. It turned its whole upper body in one smooth, powerful motion, and then it started to run. I have never, ever seen anything move like that. It didn't lumber. It didn't lope. It sped. It went from a standstill to a full sprint in 2 steps. Its legs were so long it covered ground in huge, bounding strides. Its long arms pumping, it went straight up the hill through snow that was nearly knee-deep for us, and it didn't even seem to notice. It was fast, unbelievably fast. It cleared the top of the first hill and disappeared down the other side in a matter of seconds. We just stood there, stunned. The echo of the gunshot faded away and the silence rushed back in, heavier and more oppressive than before. Then, without a word, we both started running after it. I don't know why. Adrenaline, panic, some stupid human instinct to chase the thing that's scaring you. We crashed through the alders, the branches whipping at our faces, our breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. We scrambled up the hill, our boots slipping in the snow. When we got to the top, panting, our lungs burning from the cold air, we saw it again. It was already at the top of the next hill, a good quarter-mile away, silhouetted against the moonlit sky for just a second before it vanished again. It had covered that distance up and down a steep, snow-covered hill in the time it took us to get up one small slope. We stopped, chests heaving. We knew it was pointless. We couldn't catch it. We couldn't even get close. We just stood there, looking out at the empty, moonlit hills, the only sound our own harsh breathing and the blood pounding in our ears. We walked back to the house in silence. The bravado was gone, completely wiped away. We were just two scared kids. We went inside, bolted the door, and spent the rest of the night sitting with our backs against the wall, the rifle across Frank's lap, listening to every little sound the old house made. When the sun finally came up, we went back out. The blood trail was still there, leading up to the spot where we'd first seen it. But there were no footprints, not human ones anyway. Where it had been standing, the snow was packed down in two large, indistinct depressions. But they weren't shaped like boots. They were just big, roundish impressions. And from there, the trail of its run was just a series of these deep, punched-in holes in the snow, spaced impossibly far apart. We searched for hours. We found nothing else. No more blood, no hair caught on branches, nothing. It was like it had vanished into the air. It was only later, after our parents got home and we told them what happened, they listened quietly, their faces grim, that my dad started talking about the old stories. The stories the village elders told. They called it the hairy man, or sometimes Nantina. They said it was a biped, a walker on two legs, strong, incredibly fast, and that it had been here long before we were. They said it wasn't usually mean, that it was more of a trickster, a watcher, but that it was powerful and you didn't want to cross it. We'd heard those stories all our lives, sitting around during potlatches, listening to the old folks. We'd always thought they were just stories, legends, like fairy tales. But that day, hearing my dad talk about it without a trace of doubt in his voice, looking at the dark, dried blood still smeared on the windowsill, I knew. We both knew. It wasn't a prankster. It wasn't a bear. We had seen the hairy man. There was no physical evidence. The blood washed away in the next snowfall. The packed-down snow impressions melted. We never saw it again. But the memory of it, the sheer size and speed and strength of it, the way it just stood there looking at us with those vaguely human features, that's been burned into my mind forever. It cemented the belief, not as a story, but as a real thing that is out there. Something that has been passed down through the generations for a reason. It's a part of this land, a part of the world that most people don't know exists. And sometimes on a quiet moonlit night, when the dogs start to bark for no reason, I still look out the window and I wonder if it's out there, watching. Story 19. It was a Friday. I remember that much. I'd had a crap week at work and just needed to clear my head. The best way for me to do that was to take a drive in my car. It was this little two-seater sports car, a Mazda Miata. I loved that thing. It was old and a little beat up, but it was mine. That night, it was warm, one of those perfect late spring evenings, so I put the top down. I remember the time because I looked at the clock right as I was leaving my apartment. It was 9:15. The sun was just starting to think about setting, so it was that long, golden hour light. But everything was getting a little dim, a little soft around the edges. I was driving towards the beach, not to go swimming or anything, just to sit on the sand for a bit, listen to the waves. The road was this winding two-lane blacktop that cuts through a long stretch of pine forest. It's not a main highway, more of a local shortcut. There aren't many houses out there, just trees and more trees. I had the music on loud, some classic rock station, just blasting to drown out my own thoughts. I was coming up on this one curve, a real sharp one that you have to slow down for. I knew it well. As I started to turn, my headlights swept across the road ahead, and that's when I saw it. It was just standing there, right in the middle of my lane. My brain didn't even have time to process what it was. It was just a big, dark, hairy shape, towering in the road. It wasn't a deer. It was too big, too upright. It was just there. I didn't think. I just slammed my foot on the brake and yanked the steering wheel to the left. The tires screeched like they were screaming. The car started to skid. Everything turned into a blur of motion and noise. I felt the back-end fishtail. I remember the smell of burnt rubber filling the air, mixing with the pine scent. And then I felt it, a solid, heavy thump crunch from the front passenger side of the car. It wasn't a light tap. It was a deep, jarring impact that shuddered through the whole frame. I saw this massive, dark mass tumble over the hood, right in front of my windshield, and then it was gone past the passenger side. My car spun out completely. I fought the wheel, my heart hammering in my throat so hard I thought I was going to be sick. The world was just a swirl of trees and asphalt. Finally, the car lurched to a stop, facing back the way I'd come, the engine stalling out. For a second, there was just silence, except for the ringing in my ears and my own ragged breathing. The radio had cut out. I just sat there, my hands glued to the steering wheel, shaking so bad I could feel it in my teeth. I'd hit something. A bear? It had to be a bear, a big black bear. That was the only thing that made sense. I took a few deep breaths, trying to get my shit together. I had to see what I'd hit. I had to check the damage. My keys were still in the ignition. My hand was trembling so much, I almost dropped them when I turned the key. The engine coughed back to life, and as it did, the headlights flicked on, illuminating the road behind me, and it was standing there about 50 feet away, right where it must have landed after I hit it. It was pushing itself up off the pavement. It wasn't a bear. It stood up on two legs. It was huge. I'm not good at judging height, but I remember thinking it had to be over 7 feet tall, easy. It was covered in this long, shaggy hair, a kind of red-brown color, like rust, and it was all matted with dirt and leaves. But the face is what I can't forget. It wasn't a bear's face. It was more like a person's, but wrong. It was mostly hairless with dark, leathery skin, a heavy brow and a flat nose, and it was looking right at me. Its eyes caught the headlights and they seemed to glow with a faint, dull shine, but it was the expression. It wasn't confused or hurt. It was pure, raw fury, a deep, twisting snarl pulled back its lips, showing thick, yellowed teeth. I was frozen. I couldn't move. I couldn't look away. My foot was just resting on the brake pedal, and I think my other foot was still cramping from slamming it down before. This thing, this man thing, was standing in the beam of my headlights, and it started walking towards me. It didn't run. It just took these long, deliberate strides. Its arms were long, swinging at its sides, and its hands were huge, curled into fists. The way it moved was powerful, like it owned the ground it was walking on. It was coming straight for my car. That's when the smell hit me. It came through the open top of the car like a physical wave. I gagged instantly. It was the worst thing I have ever smelled in my life, before or since. It was a thick, heavy stench of rot, like a pile of dead things left in the sun. Mixed with it was this sharp, acrid odor of sewage and something else, something musky and wild, like a wet dog, but 1,000 times worse. It was so strong it made my eyes water. I could taste it in the back of my throat, this sickening, greasy taste of decay. It kept walking towards me. It was closing the distance fast. 40 feet, 35. My brain was screaming at me to move, to do something, but my body wouldn't listen. I was just a prisoner in my own skin, watching this nightmare get closer. I could see the details now. The mud caked on its legs, the way its matted hair was clumped together in thick, dreadlock-like cords. The sheer, solid bulk of its chest and shoulders. It was built like a power lifter, but covered in that filthy pelt. It was 25 feet away now. I could hear its footsteps, heavy and solid, on the asphalt. Thump, thump, thump. Then it stopped. It stood there, just outside the direct glare of the headlights, but I could see it perfectly. It tilted its head slightly, and its eyes, those furious, intelligent eyes, locked with mine. The snarl on its face deepened. It took a deep, rumbling breath, its massive chest expanding, and then it roared. It wasn't an animal sound, it wasn't a bear's roar or a lion's. It was deeper than that, more guttural. It was a sound that came from the bottom of its guts, a violent, deafening blast of noise that felt like it hit me in the chest. It was pure rage, given a voice. The sound echoed through the trees, drowning out everything else. I felt it in my bones. That sound broke the spell. I screamed. I don't even know what I screamed. Just a raw, terrified noise. My right foot, which had been useless on the brake, found the gas pedal. I jammed it down. The little engine whined, and the car shot backwards. I was still in reverse, just trying to get away, my head craned over my shoulder to see where I was going, my eyes flicking back to the thing in the road. It charged. 1 second it was standing there, the next it was coming at me in a full sprint. It was unbelievably fast for something so big. It covered the ground in huge, bounding strides. Its arms were pumping, its head was down, and it was coming straight for the driver's side of the car. I was panicking, trying to steer backwards while watching it bear down on me. I fumbled with the gear shift, my vision blurry with tears of fear, trying to find drive. I couldn't look away from it. It was so close I could see the individual muscles moving under its skin. Just as my hand found the gear shift and I slammed it into drive, it reached the car. I stomped on the gas. The tires squealed again, grabbing the asphalt. At the exact same moment, I felt and heard a massive boom from behind me. The whole car jolted forward, lurching to the side. The steering wheel twisted in my hand. Something heavy had hit the back of the car. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just focused on the road in front of me. My foot pressed so hard to the floor, I thought I might push it through the firewall. The engine was screaming. In my rearview mirror, I saw it. The thing was still running after me. It was keeping up. It was actually keeping up with my car for a few seconds, its legs a blur of motion, its face still a mask of that insane fury. Then I saw it swing one of those huge arms. There was another, slightly duller, thud from the back of the car. And this time I felt the impact through my seat. It had punched my car. It had actually punched my car. That seemed to be its last effort. I was picking up speed, and it started to fall behind. I watched in the mirror as it slowed to a stop in the middle of the road, its chest heaving. It stood there, watching me flee, and then it threw its head back and let out another one of those terrible, echoing roars. I could hear it even over the wind and the straining engine. I didn't let up on the gas until I saw the first lights of the beach town up ahead. My whole body was trembling uncontrollably. I was crying and hyperventilating. I pulled into the first well-lit gas station I saw and parked under the brightest light, right next to the building. I just sat there for maybe 10 minutes, trying to catch my breath, my hands still locked on the wheel. The smell was still in the car. That horrible, rotting smell was everywhere, clinging to my clothes, my hair, the upholstery. It was making me nauseous. I finally got out, my legs feeling like jelly. I had to see the damage. The front passenger side was messed up. The headlight was smashed, the fender was bent back, and there was a long, deep scratch in the paint. But it was the back of the car that made my blood run cold. On the trunk lid, right above the license plate, there was a huge, fist-sized dent. The metal was pushed inwards, and next to that, there were 3 long, parallel scratches, deep enough that I could see the bare metal underneath, and stuck in one of those scratches, caught in the sharp edge of the torn metal, were a few long, coarse hairs. They were that same red-brown color. I reached out and touched one. It was thick, like a horse's tail hair, but stiffer. I pulled my hand back like I'd been burned. That's when I knew I could never ever tell anyone what really happened. A couple of my friends were meeting me at a burger joint down the street. I drove there on autopilot, the smell still making me feel sick. They were already outside when I pulled up. "Whoa, what happened to your car?" one of them asked. My mind was racing. A bear? No. They'd ask why I didn't call the cops, why there weren't any reports. A deer. The damage was too high. Stray cow, I blurted out. It was the first stupid thing that came to my mind. Big one. Came out of nowhere on that back road near the forest, smashed right into it and just kept running. They bought it. They laughed, slapped me on the back, said I was lucky it wasn't worse. I forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow even to me. We went inside, and I sat there pushing fries around my plate. The image of that face, the sound of that roar, and that god-awful smell burned into my senses. I drove home with the top up, but the smell didn't go away. It lingered in my car for weeks. No matter how many times I cleaned it or used air fresheners, it was like it had seeped into the very fabric of the car. I finally had to sell it for scrap a few months later because I couldn't stand to get in it anymore. Every time I did, I'd smell that rot and see those furious eyes in my head. I've never driven down that road again. I'll take a 20-minute detour without a second thought. I still have nightmares about it sometimes. Not the whole chase, just little pieces. The smell, the sound of the impact, the sight of it standing up in my headlights and looking at me with such pure, knowing hatred. And sometimes, when it's really quiet, I can still hear that roar.